A gym rat suddenly reincarnates as a monk. He was training alone inside a cave. On his first day, he learned how to make fire. By the fourth day, he was hunting rabbits to hit his protein goal. On the fifth day, Mujin meditated. The next day, he did push-ups. Before long, he started combining ancient Shaolin techniques with modern workout methods. The results transformed his body into something extraordinary. Before being reincarnated, he had been seriously injured while serving in the military. To recover, he devoted himself to training, but he didn't stop there. He also studied nutrition and every type of fitness training he could find. He eventually became a true gym rat and worked as a personal trainer on the side. To pay the bills, he even streamed online. Despite all that, the doctor eventually declared him dead. "You're going bald." Because of the stress from his non-stop routine, he was losing his hair and was about to go completely bald. The worst news any man could hear. Following his doctor's advice, he started reading web novels online. One in particular caught his attention, the Shaolin Monk's Murim Chronicles. He had an amazing time reading it. It felt like he hadn't relaxed that much since he was a kid. He relaxed so much that he woke up in another world. A chubby little monk was shaking him awake, saying they were going to be late. Confused, he asked how this kid got into his house. The monk demanded respect, saying he was older and bigger. The protagonist, remembering he was 5'11" in his previous life, asked if the brat needed glasses, but the truth was, he had reincarnated as the bald monk Mujin, the very protagonist of the novel he had just finished reading. At first he thought it was all a dream, so he followed the young monk, only to get scolded by the elders. That's when he realized, this dream felt way too real. Everyone was training their bodies by endlessly practicing horse stance, but from his perspective, they were just destroying their knees, and that's when you know what's about to happen. This guy is about to turn every single bald Shaolin monk into a squad of absolute gym beasts. The master starts the training, ordering everyone to get into a horse stance. Mujin then asks if the horse stance is like a squat. Straining to hold the position, all the monks endure, but Mujin claims they're doing it all wrong. Having started his exercises with physical rehabilitation, Gangyok's journey taught him the importance of core and lower body strength. Whenever he saw bad trainers focusing only on the upper body, he knew they were missing the point of the workout. For an exercise fanatic, watching the boys hold a stance with their legs too wide and hips closed was torture. Shouting, Mujin says the lower body is the foundation of martial arts and asks why they're even doing this. Calmly explaining, the master says that without controlling one's center of gravity, there's no controlling staff techniques or any other martial art. So Mujin asks what the point is if the boys aren't in the correct position. Deciding he doesn't care, he makes that perfectly clear. He yells that this is just a dream and that they know nothing about exercise. Everyone stares at him. Beside him, the young monk whispers, asking Mujin what he's doing. Stepping forward, the master asks how he dares to interrupt the training. Other monks accuse him of making excuses because it's too hard and order him back into position. Taking in the situation, Mujin realizes this is just like a martial arts novel, but he refuses to stay quiet, stating that he's just pointing out what's wrong. Unfazed by their threats, this was nothing compared to dealing with annoying customers. The master then questions him, asking if he, a Shaolin disciple, is saying their training methods are wrong. Deciding to answer like a proper character from a novel, Mujin gets into the role. He explains that if they keep training this way, they'll injure their knees and suffer when they get older. The master responds that it sounds like an excuse from someone weak. Mujin then asks him to repeat what he just said. He questions if the purpose of martial arts isn't to train weak minds and bodies, calling the master's statement a contradiction. Intervening, one of the monks explains that Shaolin martial arts are different, and that the training is meant to achieve enlightenment. With a smirk, Mujin asks if the weak shouldn't also walk the path of enlightenment, and the other monk denies it. The master shouts that it is through physical suffering that one learns to cultivate the mind. He continues, stating that the human mind is weak, but training accustoms a person to suffering and makes them stronger. Mujin questions if only the young need mental training, and the master returns the question, wanting to know what he means by that. Stating that the master himself said it, he leaves the other man confused. Mujin argues that there's no problem ruining your knees to train your mind, since you won't need to practice anymore once your body is ruined in old age. The other monks begin to whisper, agreeing that his argument seems to make sense. He then points to an older monk and asks why he hasn't ascended yet, questioning if it means he did a poor job when he was young. Outraged, the master demands to know how he dares to speak that way, and reveals he's referring to the first disciple disciple, Master Haejong. Realizing the situation, Mujin understands that this is the first disciple. Watching in silence, everyone remains in the courtyard. Master Haejong starts walking, stating that the boy's words have been noted and that Buddhist martial practice is a path to the Buddha. But he turns and says their practice is different, and Mujin asks how. He explains they train to protect and serve the people from malicious elements that might threaten them. So Mujin asks if they're destroying their knees in the name of protecting people. Staring at the child, Master Haejong holds his gaze firm. Realizing the boy could spread a negative influence, he understands that punishing him directly would not be the Buddha's way. So he challenges him to prove that the Shaolin training method is wrong. And to do that, Mujin must face someone who trained with their method and defeat them. Mujin asks who, hoping it's not the master himself. Master Haejong replies that, to be fair, he will face another novice disciple, and calls for Mugung to step forward. Giving Mujin a chance to prove himself, he grants him 1 week to train with his superior method, and then he must face that child. Complaining, Mujin points out they're in completely different weight classes, and asks how that could possibly be fair. Understanding the situation, he realizes this is all a show to shut him up using another novice. Master Haejong nods and says that's fine. Mujin asks him to say that again. Accepting the challenge, he declares he is Gangyok Choi and he won't lose to a child. Staring back, Mugung says he'll see him in a week. Turning away, Master Haejong says that Mujin has made his own bed, and may the Buddha be with him. Master Haejong orders everyone back to training, and the monks obey. The young monk approaches Mujin, asking why he did that and suggesting he should apologize. But Mugung shouts for Muyul to get back in his place, and he complies. As the other monks comment, Mugung glares at Mujin, and Master Haejong watches from a distance. Focusing on his own training, he stays sharp. Mujin confronts the master, asking if his rank is higher than Master Haejong's. Master Haejong intervenes, reminding him that a promise is a promise. The master agrees to leave him alone. Turning to the others, he says that's not how you exercise, as they're just destroying the cartilage in their knees, and he asks who they think will pay the bill if they injure their knees at that age. Watching from a distance, Master Haejong asks for Buddha to be with him. After training for 2 hours, Mujin is eager for a meal when Muyul calls him to eat. He then looks at the meal and wonders if that's all there is. At a long table, one of the masters invites everyone to eat, but Mujin remembers that temple food is vegetarian and asks where the protein is. He realizes how vivid the smell of the food is in this dream. It smells good, but he sees it's just vegetables, and to him, it might as well be grass. Slamming the table, Mujin declares this is child abuse and asks who dares to disturb mealtime. Shouting, he says they trained all morning and asks if they're expected to just eat this. Standing up, Mugung asks what the meaning of this is, stating the boy has been nothing but trouble since dawn. Approaching him, he says that's enough and he's going to teach him a lesson. But Mujin insists that a body needs protein after training and that he won't tolerate the situation. Called by someone, Mujin and Mugung look to the side. Appearing, head chef Hyun Moon, the Shaolin Temple's head cook, says he was just passing by. He comments that the poor disciple must be quite hungry. He offers to give him more rice, but Mujin replies that he has enough. He then asks if the young man wants more side dishes, as the child is clearly hungry. Mujin asks if they have any protein supplements, or better yet, chicken breasts. The chef and the other monks stare at him, and one of them asks what the hell is wrong with him. Approaching, Muyul says he's been acting strange all morning and asks if he's okay, but Mujin just yells that he needs his protein to build muscle for his body. He then wonders what is happening. The training feels hard, the food smells real, and he questions why he hasn't woken up yet if this is a dream. Considering the possibility that this might be real, he decides he needs to be more careful. Remembering he is a disciple in a Shaolin temple, he understands he must watch what he says. Bowing, he apologizes, explaining he was so hungry he didn't know what he was saying. The head chef agrees, stating he must be tired from training. Taking a chance, Mujin asks if he can have some beans or mushrooms. Staring at him in silence, the chef doesn't answer. Dream or not, Mujin needed his protein either way. The routine of training, breakfast, and studying Buddhist scriptures bores him. Accepting that he's inside a novel, he wonders how the hell he'll get back home. Then, the idea comes to him that maybe he can leave when the story is over. As the protagonist in a legendary martial arts school, he would surely have a lot of talent. He accidentally knocks the ink over on his book, creating a new problem. Realizing the situation, he notices he's already surrounded by the other monks, and he realizes he's drawn too much attention to himself. Staring at him in silence, everyone in the room keeps their eyes fixed on him, but he decides that since he's here, there's nothing he can do about it now. Questioning the head chef, Master Haejong asks if it's true, and he confirms the boy is indeed strange. Then Hyunmun asks him what he'll do with Mujin. Master Haejong explains that he gave him 1 week to back up his claims by challenging Mugung. Praising the solution, Hyunmoon calls it a wise way to escape criticism, but he questions the decision to make him face Mugung. Every year, the Shaolin Temple invites hundreds of children to compete, but many can't handle the training and drop out. Only a small percentage of those who start are officially accepted as true disciples. Because of this, it's rare for the first disciple or any senior monk to know a single child by name, and Mugung is one of those chosen few. Hyejong states that Mugung is perfect for the task, and that he will teach that boy a lesson, announcing that, as promised, 1 week has passed. Master Hyejong marks the moment. He then asks if they are both ready. Turning around, Muyul asks Mujin what he's doing. He responds that they're warm-up stretches. To make it sound like martial arts, he calls the move the four-limb extension technique. As part of any warm-up routine, stretching prepares the muscles and loosens the ligaments. There are many different positions and exercises, all aimed at increasing flexibility and range of motion. Inviting Muyul to try it with him, Mujin says it's good to get into the habit. Watching, other monks wonder what they're doing and what's with those weird poses. Catching on immediately, Muyul follows along, and Mujin praises him for being good at it. Suddenly, one of the monks points to Mugung's punches and asks if that's the chain fist. Mugung then throws a punch into the air. Commenting among themselves, the other monks talk about how incredible he is and that they can hear the air crack with every blow. Realizing the situation, Mujin understands he's finished if one of those punches hits him and wonders how he's supposed to beat him in a week. He asks himself how on earth he's going to take him down. Suddenly, an idea strikes him, and now he knows exactly what to do. Recalling the incident, Master Hyejong remembers that Mujin claimed he wasn't making excuses to get out of training. He might not follow instructions, but it seems he has his own training methods. Mujin explains that he's practicing how to take down Mugung in a single move, but he still wonders why the boy keeps rubbing that tree. Confident, he believes Mugung will take care of the kid's attitude problem. Noticing the gaze, Mugung sees that Master Hyejong is watching him directly. Preparing himself, he states that the boy will have to be his stepping stone. Stretching in front of his opponent, Mujin remains calm. He then stands up and stretches his back. Gesturing, he asks Master Hyejong if they can begin. The boy's attitude, irritating both the master and Mugung, hangs heavy in the air. Taking a step forward, Mugung says he'll show him. Facing his opponent, Mujin waits for the signal to start. Revealing his confidence, Mugung shows how hard he has perfected his chain fist. Then the master yells for them to begin, and Mujin immediately rushes forward. Startled, Mugung reacts to the rapid advance. Realizing the danger, he understands it's a blitz attack. Surprised, the other monks and the master notice his speed, seeing he dodged the chain fist. He grabs Mugung, knowing he can't use real fighting techniques on a kid. Having learned martial arts for actual combat, he knew one slip could be fatal, so the best technique for this situation was something any child should be able to handle. Taking him down with a tackle, Mujin doesn't hesitate. Hitting the ground hard, Mugung takes the impact. Taking just a second, Mujin applies an armbar. Shouting, the other monks don't understand what's happening and tell Mugung to hang in there. Unable to believe what they're seeing, shock takes over, and they wonder if brother Mugung could already be losing. Wriggling on the ground, Mugung doesn't understand what happened. Desperately trying to guide him, some monks yell for him to use his legs and roll, but they know it's too late. Even without knowing what an armbar is, years of training tell them, and they recognize a painful position when they see one. Warning him, Mujin says his arm will break if he continues and tells him to just give up. The other monks shout for him to get up, reminding him that his opponent is untrained. Mujin asks if he can feel the bone about to snap, warning that the damage could be permanent. He insists, telling Mugung to break free or just tap out. The monks continue to shout Mugung's name. Mujin and the monks watch, their gazes locked on the struggle. Immediately, he lets him go and apologizes. Turning, one of the monks looks at Master Hyejong and asks what they should do about this. Walking over to Mugung on the ground, Mujin says, this is what happens when you force him to fight a child. An ancient book describes the fundamentals of the chain fist technique. As a form of the 8 extremes fist, it focuses on strikes with the fist, elbow, and shoulder. Aiming to quickly overpower an opponent, it's used in close quarters combat. And among the novice children, Mugung had mastered this technique the most. Even the older generation of disciples marveled at his chain fist. But that morning, the remarkable technique was overcome by a troublemaker's unknown method. With little resistance, he was utterly defeated. Sitting up, he complains it was a cheap shot, and Mujin asks what he means. Accusingly, Mugung says he was attacked as soon as they started, and that a strange technique was used. Shouting, he claims he would have won in a real fight, and Mujin comforts him. As they walk away, he corrects him, saying his name is Mugung, not Mugi, as other monks watch. One of the monks states that Shaolin sparring must be done with Shaolin techniques, a rule Mujin broke. Questioning him, another monk asks why the chain fist wasn't used. Mujin replies that if he had used it, they would have just traded blows and both been badly injured. He states that he won without hurting him, but the monk insists that's not how it works and that Shaolin techniques must be used. Unaccepting, they refuse to see the Shaolin chain fist defeated so easily by an untrained boy using unknown techniques. Admitting defeat, one of them acknowledges that Mugung lost but questions if they're being unreasonable. He fears that if this continues, doubts will be cast on Shaolin martial arts. In the worst-case scenario, they could lose all their disciples. Turning, they approach Master Hyejong and ask what they should do. Then they see him smiling and wonder what he's thinking. Calling for Mujin, Master Hyejong summons him, and he approaches. The master asks if it's true that the technique was used to subdue Mugung without injuring him, and Mujin confirms. Declaring that this is within the Shaolin spirit, he announces Mujin as the winner of today's challenge. All the monks react with surprise at the decision. Mujin wonders why the master has suddenly become so lenient, but Master Hyejong explains that his technique was so effective because his opponent only knows brute force. He states that he will demonstrate the essence of Shaolin martial arts. Preparing himself, he announces he will show the true power of Shaolin against evil. Two monks drag a huge boulder to the center of the courtyard, clearing a space. Mujin wonders if he's going to break it with his bare hands, realizing it's a personal demonstration. Planting his feet firmly, he tells everyone to watch closely, as this is what they are training for. He then places his hand on the rock to demonstrate the true power of the chain fist. With a shout, he delivers a powerful punch to the rock. The rock shatters into several pieces. Commenting among themselves, they talk about the power of the chain fist and how they now understand why he is the first disciple. Smiling, Mujin exclaims that this is what he calls true Murim martial arts. Capable of piercing a mountain with a single blast, Murim martial arts go beyond. They can also strike down hundreds of enemies with a single swing of the sword, and even make an opponent explode with a single punch. Interrupting, one of the monks asks Master Hyejong if the ultimate goal isn't defense. Turning, he confirms that it is. Pointing at the ground, Mujin makes a simple gesture, and questions if they should defend themselves with that kind of intensity. The master replies that perhaps not. Later that morning, things calm down. Hyunsung, Hyejong's master, asks if the child, Mujin, overpowered Mugung in the blink of an eye. Hyejong confirms this is correct, and his master concludes he's not just a strange child. He explains that although he criticizes the morning training, Mujin practices the chain fist more than any of the other novices. He asks again if he suspects the boy is studying the technique to find ways to defeat it. Hyejong confirms he does, and Hyunsung asks what he thinks. He suggests the possibility that the boy is a spy from the sinister faction or the demonic cult. Surprised, the suspicion leaves him speechless. Meanwhile, Mujin gets frustrated with the scriptures, and his master wonders if the child could really be a spy. Master Hyejong wonders if the child could be a spy, but Hyunsung doubts it. A real spy would never draw so much attention, unless their goal was to interfere. He states there's nothing to worry about. The boy is still a novice disciple, and time will tell if he's a spy or just a strange kid. Then, a new possibility comes to his mind. He hypothesizes that the boy might actually be from a martial arts clan. After all, Mujin couldn't have created those mysterious techniques on his own. He's probably just using his clan's techniques. Believing this, he thinks the boy, out of admiration for his father, would reject 1,000 years of Shaolin teachings just to prove his family's techniques are superior. And after defeating Mugung, he would be even more determined, which could complicate things. Suggesting a solution, Hyunsung proposes they ask for Beopgang's help. Surprised, Hyejong asks if Beopgang isn't a member of the Hall of Discipline now. Reassuring him, his master says that Beopgang still considers himself part of the Arhat Hall, and his involvement changes everything. Elsewhere, 3 young monks decide to end their training for the day and head back inside. Changing his mind, one of them tells the others to go a different way, leaving them confused. Curious, they all peek to see what's outside, wondering if he saw a ghost. Looking into the courtyard, they see a man training and wonder why he's there. Recognizing him, one of them says it's the Inquisitor, Brother Beopgang, and again, questions why he's there. The other monks whisper among themselves, not understanding why the man who always trained late into the night is doing the horse stance right there. Guessing at a reason, One of the youths thinks he's there to pressure them into training harder. Another monk comments that Beopgang has always been intense, and it's no wonder they call him the Inquisitor. Laughing, one of the young men says that Beopgang, the wild attack dog of the Hall of Discipline, has found the right place for himself. Correcting them, one of the monks reveals that Brother Beopgang will be back in the Arhat Hall with them starting tomorrow. Surprised, the others question the information. They thought he was supposed to start at the Hall of Discipline next term. It was common knowledge that Beopgang had a high rank and had established a stricter standard of discipline for the third generation of disciples. Rumors spread that he was visiting every hall to better understand the laws before returning to the Hall of Discipline, but Beopgang was strict and always led by example, never asking anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. Since basic training, he trained harder and longer than anyone else, which took a toll on his knees. It took all his inner strength to overcome the constant pain, even when walking, and now they barely work. To him, training was a sacred journey, and pain was just part of the path. After finishing 30 minutes in the horse stance, he stands up and asks where the child, Mujin, is. Picturing him, Beopgang visualizes the troublemaker and rising star of the Arhat Hall that Master Hyunsong spoke of. The next day, the young monks look ahead, and one of them questions what he's seeing. In front of all the novices stands Brother Beopgang, and questions arise about what he's doing there. He announces that he's been transferred, and from that day on, he'll be with them again, leaving one of the boys shocked. Laughing, Beopgang tells them to get used to it. Watching him, Mujin notices he's the military type. While the other monks whisper among themselves, wondering why he's back, Mujin just observes the scene. Confusion spreads among the novices, who don't understand Beopgang's presence. But amidst the chaos, Mujin quickly grasps the situation. He concludes that the new instructor must have been the drill sergeant of his generation. As morning training begins, the boy figures it's not his problem. Immediately, Beopgang orders everyone into the horse stance. Walking among the disciples, he states that before you can discipline someone, you must understand exactly what they're doing wrong. To strike with precision, you need to understand them on a fundamental level, so he begins his inspection to see how they're doing. Observing one of the monk's stances, he notes the wide-set legs, straight back, and forward-facing toes. Demonstrating the same posture, Beopgang asks what the young man is doing. He thinks the movements look more like a dance, noticing inhalations and exhalations with each gesture, but he realizes the pain is the same as the horse stance, concluding it was just an excuse. As he stands up, Mujin hears Beopgang say directly that his stance is wrong. Then Beopgang asks how the stance is wrong. Realizing the situation, he understands he needs to correct everything from top to bottom. Not understanding why he's being mimicked, Mujin hears the man's knee cartilage grind every time they're bent. Feeling the discomfort, he realizes he can't just ignore the fact that the man's knees seem to be crying out for help. He concludes that if this man is the drill instructor, having him on his side would be a huge advantage. Smiling, Mujin hears Beopgang ask again what was wrong. The young man explains that with bad knees, that exercise is counterproductive and asks if he can show him something. He then demonstrates a stretching exercise on the floor. Praising him, Mujin comments on his flexibility, while the other monks in the background wonder what's happening. Correcting himself, he calls the exercise the forelimb extension technique, explaining that the position allows the knee muscles to relax. He states that warming up this way will make movement smoother during training and reduce the strain on the knees. Beopgang agrees as he feels the difference. Mujin then instructs him to hold for 30 seconds per set, for a total of 3 sets, explaining the movement must be repeated 3 times. Saying that was the first set and now it's time to start over, Mujin notices Beopgang is on the ground. Approaching him, he begins to massage the man's leg and asks if he feels better. Noticing his reaction, he sees that even light pressure causes pain, concluding that decades of excessive training have left the knees in this state. As the massage continues, Beopgang seems to notice a change. Reflecting, he realizes that at first it felt like an attack, but now the pain is subsiding and it almost feels good. Mujin informs him they've only done the exercise twice and still need one more, but Beopgang questions if it has to be done right now. Pushing him from behind, the young man says that training waits for no one. Looking back, Beopgang wonders who the hell this kid is. Watching from a distance, Master Hejong and his disciples also look on, questioning what Beopgang is doing. Mujin explains that this is how you should exercise when you have knee problems. Known as the Inquisitor, he was an orthodox fanatic, obsessed with the rules. Because of him, his fellow second-generation disciples never had a moment's rest, not even as novices, and they knew his fanatical devotion well. So they didn't understand why Beopgang and the novice were together, doing the same strange movements. In the middle of training, Mujin suggests they take a break before doing another 15 reps. The boy asks why he lets his knees go into a full squat, something he was instructed not to do since they weren't in good shape. He explains that it's better to do just a slight bend to relieve the pressure. So he decides to review everything Beopgang needs to do, and he agrees. First, he instructs him to bend his knees and lower his body slowly. Second, he explains that the movement shouldn't be controlled with the knees, but with the hip and glute muscles. And third, he guides him to use those same muscles to come back up. After the exercise, Mujin asks how he feels, and Beopgang replies that he's fine, so they decide to take a break. Noticing the change, he realizes he definitely felt less pain that time. Mujin announces that since they've finished the 3 sets, they can now move on to the calves. He remembers that tough military-type clients showed up all the time. He also remembers that the tougher they looked, the easier it was to win them over with compliments. Praising him, Mujin says he's a fast learner, and Beopgang laughs, stating he's been a Shaolin disciple for 18 years. The other monks wonder what happened to the wild dog, who now seems quite docile. Watching the scene, Master Hyejong feels his blood pressure rise and asks Buddha for help. With a headache, he decides to ignore them for now, as the bell announces the end of training and breakfast time. Mujin advises him to use what he's learned whenever he trains his lower body, making sure to do it before any other exercise. Beopgang agrees, completely won over by Mujin, but without forgetting why he's there. After experiencing the physical therapy, stretching, and massage, he comes to a conclusion. He concludes that those techniques are incredible. Feeling almost no pain in his knee, he feels in his muscles just how effective the training was, recognizing the techniques were undeniably efficient. Then Beopgang asks if he learned all those techniques from his family. Finding them impressive, he assumes the boy comes from an important clan. Understanding what they're thinking, Mujin realizes they believe the techniques were passed down through generations. Noticing this, he concludes that this story would cover all his strange behaviors so far. Smiling, the young man confirms they are techniques learned from his family, and Beopgang laughs, praising them as truly impressive. Beopgang clarifies that he was only referring to the impressive healing techniques, because in martial arts, nothing surpasses Shaolin's history. Meeting up with Muyul, Mujin says he'll keep Brother Beopgang's words in mind. Turning around, he says he's finished and asks for permission to leave, which Beopgang grants. Mujin tells Muyul he should have gone ahead, but his friend replies that he wanted to wait for him. Startled, Beopgang sees Master Hyejong standing right behind him. He immediately apologizes to the master for how the situation looked, and Hyejong acknowledges that he's aware of how it appeared. Laughing, Beopgang explains that he wanted to personally try the novice's training to know the enemy, and the master asks how it went. As the young men walk away, Beopgang begins to explain what he managed to figure out about that child, Mujin. He reveals that the boy isn't from a martial arts clan, but rather a clan of healers. Hyejong asks what led him to that conclusion, and Beopgang prepares to explain. He begins by saying that his knees are nearly ruined from years of training, and the master asks why he kept it a secret. He replies that he didn't want to worry the elders and, more importantly, couldn't show weakness in front of the disciples. For decades, none of his brothers noticed his knee problems, but that child noticed immediately and warned him that his knees would get worse if he continued. Beopgang concludes that everything he practiced with Mujin were, in fact, techniques to lessen the strain on his knees. Hyejong speculates he might be from a clan of doctors who treat Murim masters, but quickly dismisses the idea, lamenting what a disaster it is for a child to reject Shaolin training. Beopgang states that children listen to adults they feel close to, and decides that instead of forcing him, he will befriend him to bring him back to the Shaolin path. The master agrees, stating there's no need to be impatient. Sighing, Mujin complains about having to study Buddhist scriptures right after breakfast, and Muyul comments that his face is bruised. The master announces that since everyone has mastered the basics of the chain link fist, they will move on to the next step. He explains that the true power of martial arts can only be achieved when inner and outer strength are in harmony, and that they will now begin to develop their inner strength. He then calls 2 disciples to the front for a demonstration. He instructs everyone to follow the example of Beopgyung and Beopgong and get into the lotus position, but Mujin doesn't know what that means. But upon seeing one of the disciples get into position, he remembers the posture. The master instructs them to close their eyes and focus on their breathing. Guiding them, he asks them to inhale deeply through the nose, drawing the air in, and to keep breathing until they feel the air near their chi center. Excited, Mujin feels like he's finally learning the Murim martial arts he's always fantasized about. Getting into position, tired of the repetitive and incorrect training, he readies himself for what he considers the real part. After rigorous basic training, the novices faces are filled with childish excitement to finally be learning Murim martial arts. They wonder if they'll learn to break a rock like Master Hejong with the ancient Shaolin arts. Focused, they all concentrate on the master's voice, inhaling and exhaling as instructed. Sensing the situation, Mujin feels something is wrong with this training too. Finding it strange, he thinks that even though it's just a breathing exercise, this wasn't how he remembered the training in the novels. He wonders where the teachings about yin-yang, the 5 elements, and the I Ching are. But he supposes they must have their reasons. So after complaining about all the training so far, he finally starts to do as he's told. The reason is simple. It's internal strength training, and his excitement is at its peak. With the transcendent power of internal strength, it would be possible to split mountains and even fly. After all, the internal strength techniques from the Murim novels are taught at Shaolin, and he was finally going to learn them. Calling for attention, the master tells everyone to open their eyes. He explains that the inhalation and exhalation technique is a meditation to feel and gather qi, which is essential for using internal strength techniques. He advises them to practice whenever they have time to feel the qi in their bodies. Mujin now understands they aren't teaching internal strength techniques yet, just the basic breathing. Understanding the process, he realizes he needs to feel the qi to cultivate internal strength, and then he sees a book being picked up. Senior disciples begin distributing pamphlets with diagrams of the body's meridians, and one reaches Mujin. Master Hejong informs them that they don't need to memorize everything, but they must learn the main meridians to manipulate qi and subdue opponents. As the pathways through which qi flows in the human body, the meridians are essential for mastering martial arts. Calling someone forward, the master begins to teach the location of some meridians. Determined, Mujin flips through the booklet, deciding to memorize all the pathways of qi by the end of the day. As the first step on the Shaolin Buddhist path of emptiness, learning the meridians and practicing the technique to gather qi becomes essential. He wonders if just memorizing the technique is enough, but upon seeing Brother Beopgang training, he asks what he's doing. Laughing, Beopgang explains that the training methods have improved his knee pain, so now he's training even harder. Covering his ears, Mujin says he can hear the man's cartilage and states that he taught him those things so his knees could heal. Beopgang retorts that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire and shows off the muscles from 18 years of training, but Mujin disagrees. The boy explains that if the fire gets too hot, the steel simply melts, and the same goes for their bodies. He then apologizes and asks Beopgang to sit down. Mujin informs him that he will manipulate his qi and warns that it will hurt a little. As he presses on the knee, he asks the man to let him know if it hurts. Feeling those worn-out knees, the sensation reminds him of something. He recalls his time in the special forces. With every step, there was constant strain. Despite his injuries, he kept training relentlessly until he destroyed his own body. But all that hard work didn't allow him to stay in the service. In the end, he was discharged. That was the lowest point in his life. He just watched the rain fall. Reflecting, Beopgang thinks that's how Mujin must have looked back then. While massaging him, Mujin advises him to take care of himself, because if his body breaks down, no one will help him. Beopgang interrupts him, causing Mujin to wonder if he was being too preachy. Beopgang then says he has no idea what Mujin has been through, but that even if he were to fall apart, Shaolin would not turn its back on him. Smiling, Beopgang asserts that they don't abandon any disciple, no matter what happens. With a slight smile, Mujin reacts in silence. Beopgang then apologizes for taking his time and asks where he was going. The boy replies that he was going to practice the technique they learned. The man then asks if he hasn't trained enough at home, since a doctor's son should understand the flow of qi. Stumbling over the question, Mujin says that some things came up and he never learned about the flow of qi. Beopgang suggests they practice right now. Pointing at the boy, he says that perhaps by watching him, Mujin might be able to find his qi faster. Sitting down, Mujin admits he has no idea how to feel his own qi, but believes he'll learn something by watching up close. Getting into position, the boy says he's ready, and Beopgang tells him to start concentrating. Kneeling, Beopgang tells him to watch and see what he can learn, hoping it will help. He then begins to breathe deeply, and Mujin watches intently. As the meditation continues, the boy notices that the air around them already feels different. This is Mujin's chance to see what's being done differently. Suddenly, he notices something he had never seen when training alone. He wonders if this is what everyone was talking about. Looking at Beopgang, Mujin asks if that is qi. Sitting down, Mujin begins to practice his breathing. Trying to draw in the pure qi from nature, he directs it all to his energy center. Focusing on the technique, posture, and visualization, he starts to gather the qi, and finally he feels the flow of energy within him. Opening his eyes, he realizes he managed to feel the qi, but something still puzzles him. He wonders why his qi is only the size of a grain of rice. Even so, he's happy with this small progress, winning his first mental battle. Noticing the change, Beopgang sees the boy has already started to feel the chi, confirming that Master Hyejong and the director were right. Continuing his practice, Mujin is now used to the breathing, but he feels a strange cold sensation and opens one eye. Coming to his senses, he sees Beopgang standing in front of him and is startled to see it's already night. Apologizing for the late hour, he and Muyul explain themselves, but Beopgang says it's fine and hurries them back. Thanking him for the lesson, Mujin says goodbye, and Beopgang is impressed with the level of chi he already has. Beopgang comments that it looks like he can start training in the way of the void, but Mujin asks if he doesn't need to memorize the meridians first. The man reminds him that as a doctor's son, he should already know them, and the boy agrees sheepishly. Ending the joke, Beopgang rushes him inside as it's getting late. Mujin complains to himself, regretting having pretended to be from a clan of doctors. The next day, the master asks those who have felt the chi and memorized the meridians to step forward, and Mujin steps up. Surprised, he realizes he wasn't the only one, and wonders what's going on. Taking in the situation, he understands that feeling the chi wasn't a big deal, since others managed it too. The master announces they are ready for the next level, leaving Mujin confused, as he thought he was a genius. Presenting a book, he shows that it contains a summary of the Buddhist way of the void, one of the fundamentals of Shaolin teaching. Flipping through the book, he warns that since they are novices, he will be brief and start with the basic concepts. As he begins the explanation, the novices are left in awe. Impressed, the other disciples comment that they felt the chi and learned the meridians in just one day. Then Mujin's group returns from training. Muyul asks how he managed to do all that in just one day, and the reply is that it wasn't too hard since it was the beginner level. Mujin explains that first, you need to learn to draw chi into your body and circulate it, being more careful with the meridians as you advance. Muyul then asks if he's supposed to have understood all that, and Mujin says no, advising him. The boy says to focus on breathing first, as understanding will come soon. Dedicating himself, Mujin memorizes the meridians and their order, engraving them in his mind as the first step toward Shaolin mastery. While meditating, he feels the chi accumulating faster, even if they are just small improvements. Getting excited, he realizes this is real inner strength training, just like in the novels he used to read, and feels he's making progress. The training continues smoothly as he practices chi meditation, but he hears someone calling. Turning around, he asks Muyul where he's been. Then he sees his friend dragging another monk. He asks if that's a corpse. Muyul corrects him, saying it's Mugyong's body, and Mujin asks if he's dead. Reassuring him, his friend says that Mugyong, one of their older brothers, is alive. He explains that he tried to wake him, but he was passed out and too heavy to carry. Asking for a second, Mujin runs toward the fallen man. Crouching down, he examines the monk stretched out on the ground. Looking closer, he notices the marks on the body weren't from being dragged. It becomes obvious, and he understands what happened. Turning to Muyul, he states that someone beat the guy up. Pointing, he says the monk was kicked and is bruised all over, and his friend agrees. But then he starts to wonder why that name sounds so familiar. He remembers seeing a young monk who, unlike the others, always looked thin and worn out. Until now, he had only noticed Mugyong in passing, but he was trying to remember something else. The name sounds very familiar, but he can't associate it with a face. Deciding to set that aside for now, he asks why Mugyong got beaten so badly. Muyul agrees that it's a good question, and Mujin asks if he knows the reason. He answers no, but says they can find out and that he already has a hunch about what happened. Smiling, Mujin says he knows who they can ask. He explains that since the guy got there before them, they need to ask someone who was at the location before he was. He's referring to that guy he fought with, and Muyul understands who he means. Turning around, Mugong asks what they want. Doubtful, Muyul finds it unlikely that Mugong beat up the newcomer, saying it would be a relief if that crybaby even had the guts for it. But Mujin points out that Mugong is the oldest novice and would know how things were before they arrived. Walking through the courtyard, the two continue on as Muyul carries the unconscious boy on his shoulders. Suddenly appearing before them, Mugong asks what's going on. Losing his balance, Muyul drops the young man, who hits the ground hard. Watching in silence, other monks look on, and one of them asks if he just killed him. Mugong questions why the two are bothering him during his precious training time. Confronting him, Mujin criticizes his attitude and tells him to act like a big brother and show some concern. Mugong retorts that Mujin should act like a junior and show some respect, but the boy reminds him that he's already beaten him before. Defending himself, Mugong claims he just had his guard down, and Muyul agrees. Calling him a brat, Mugong lunges forward to throw a punch. With a quick movement, Mujin dodges the blow, pinning him from behind with a twisting technique. He restrains his opponent as Muyul laments that brother Mugong has lost again. With his opponent trapped, Mujin states that he'll never win against him. Tightening his grip, he asks if he knows why, making Mugong squirm. He then offers a deal, promising to reveal the reason for his losses if he tells them what happened to Mugyong. With a swift move, Mugung breaks free from Mujin's hold. Brushing off his shoulder, Mujin remarks that he's obviously angry, still upset about the loss. He continues, saying that for someone as proud as Mugung, losing like that must be eating him up inside. Mugung stops and turns around as Mujin demands he first tell them what happened to Mugyong. He reveals that Mugyong was beaten up by Mutai and his gang, the only son of the Seo clan, protectors of the Shaolin merchants. A flashback shows Mugyong next to his father, a servant of that clan. When recruiting Mutai as a disciple, Master Hayeman recognized Mugyong's talent and brought him along too. But Mutai couldn't stand the idea of a servant's son being his equal and started bullying him. Furthermore, Mugyong's father still works for Mutai's father, making the situation even more complicated. That's why the boy can't just report Mutai to the higher-ups. Gritting his teeth, Mugung says he might understand if this were a normal school, but he points at Mujin and yells that this is Shaolin, questioning why he doesn't do anything since he's been there longer. Justifying himself, he asks what he could possibly do, but Mujin retorts that he's the strongest and should be defending him. Mugung argues that there are 3 of them, but Mujin points out that Muyul considers him the strongest in the temple. Embarrassed, Mugung admits they probably think that because the others don't train hard, which piques Mujin's curiosity. He then remembers that those guys are from clans of the Shaolin sect. He explains that the disciples from these clans already learn the basics of martial arts, which is why they don't try so hard. Mujin concludes that this means they're more advanced than the other novices. Suddenly, they all turn as they realize Mugyong is waking up. Sitting up on the ground, the boy confusedly asks where he is. He then touches his own head, still disoriented. Upon seeing the 3 monks in front of him, he cowers in fear. He starts to drag himself backward as Mujin tells him not to worry. Holding up his hands, Mujin says Mugung explained the situation, and that he understands he's traumatized and afraid of everyone. He wonders just how much the boy has been bullied, and how this could happen at the Shaolin temple. He realizes that even if they went to Master Hiejung, Mugyong's father could get into trouble, but with a determined look, he affirms there must be something they can do. Approaching him, Mujin tells Mugyong he has an idea to help him. The boy asks if he really wants to help, and Mujin states that the solution is simple. He explains that since the bullies use his father's position to threaten him, they'll just report them to Master Hiejung. Suspicious, Mugyong asks if he's mocking him, worried about what they would do to his father. Reassuring him, Mujin says he's already thought of that, and that all he needs to do is become a true disciple of Shaolin. He defines a true disciple as one who officially commits to the main Shaolin order. And since most clan disciples come from the outside, they can't mess with a disciple from the official order. Understanding, Mugyong gets what Mujin is suggesting. Mugung also realizes what the ultimate goal of the plan is, but Muyul remains confused, not understanding the proposal. Clarifying, Mujin explains that a clan disciple could never mess with a true disciple or his father, though he admits the plan might not work. Remembering Beopgang's words that Shaolin never turns its back on a disciple, he decides to see if that's true. Extending a hand to Mugyong, he states that not only Master Hiejung but all of Shaolin would not allow such an injustice. Before them, Mujin and the others await the boy's decision. Encouraging him, Mujin asks him to say something and questions if he's afraid of not becoming a true disciple. Hesitating, Mugyong just stammers as he looks at the outstretched hand. Mujin asks again how the boy treats him. He questions if he wants his father to keep working for a family like that. Continuing, he warns that if he does nothing, his father will end up working for Mutai, and then he asks if he can live with that idea. Holding Mujin's hand firmly, Mugyong declares he'll do whatever it takes. Helping him up, Mujin says it was a good decision. Turning to the others, he announces it's time for the second part of the plan. Worried, Mugyong fears he can't endure more beatings until he becomes a disciple, but Mujin says there's no secret. 3 days later, during the afternoon break, some monks gather in the courtyard. One of Mutai's companions asks if he's sure Mugyong will show up today. Confirming, Mutai reveals he threatened him, saying he'd send a message to his house if he didn't show. His lackeys, Muhui and Muhuan, comment that they were already itching for a fight, as 2 days feels like a long time for those used to daily beatings. One of them asks if they've seen Mugyong hanging around with strange people lately, like Mujin and Muyul. The other confirms, adding that even that arrogant Mugung was with them. He concludes they'll have more targets for their beating practice. Commenting with disdain, Mutai says it's his lucky day, as he's been wanting to give that kid Mujin a good beating. Agreeing, his companions say he's always muttering about something and that they've never liked the look of Mugung. Recalling the past, they remember seeing him cry, and one of of them promises to make him cry again. Nearby, Mujin comments to Mugung that one of them doesn't like his face, and Mugung understands why they were always staring at him. Walking forward, the group heads towards the bullies, and Mutai confronts them for not running away. One of the lackeys sneers at Mujin, saying he must be feeling pretty tough after beating that blockhead. Provoking him, Mujin nudges Mugung about the insult, and he responds by telling one of them to step up so he can shut his mouth for good. Muyul volunteers to fight one of them. Mugung claims the last one, and Mujin is left with Mutai. But turning around, Mujin says Mutai is all Mugyong's, who hesitantly agrees. He asks him if he remembers what he taught him, and he assures him he'll be fine. But Mugyong still doubts if he can really beat him. Approaching slowly, Mutai remarks that Mugyong has made some friends and says he's very jealous. The two groups face off, staring each other down. Mutai calls him a crybaby, and Mujin promises to make him learn his place. Stopping right in front of him, Mutai asks what he plans to do. Then he questions if he's just going to stand there, or if he's finally going to fight back. Trembling, Mugyong says he can't do it, while Mutai reminds him of what will happen if he attacks him. Threateningly, he says he knows what will happen to his father. The memory of his father takes shape in his mind. Recalling Mujin's words, he remembers there's only one way to free him, and that way is to teach them a lesson and become a true disciple of Shaolin. With tears in his eyes, he tells them not to dare. Charging forward, he screams for them not to do anything to his father. Surprised, Mute reacts and strikes back. Meanwhile, Muyul blocks Muhui's punch, who admits he's not just a blockhead. Grabbing Muhuan's fist, Mugung surprises him with his strength. Noticing the difference, he sees that his opponent isn't just stronger, but different. Something seems to have completely changed in Mugung. Remembering the past, he recalls when he refused to help. Mujin had questioned his role as an older brother, asking if he was scared. Mujin says that since Mugung agreed to help, they can drop the subject, but he's interrupted by Mugung's refusal. Demanding an answer, Mugung reminds him the subject was why he always loses. Explaining, Mujin says his chain fist is fast and strong, but that's all it is. Taking a fighting stance, he challenges him to dodge his attack. He lunges with a punch, and Mugung manages to dodge. Mujin congratulates him. Announcing the second form, he tells him to dodge once more. With a shout, he prepares to attack, while Mugung focuses on avoiding the blow, but instead of a punch, he hits him with a low kick. Rolling on the ground, Mugung complains that he lied, but Mujin explains that no opponent will just let him attack. He then states that you have to deceive your opponent. Mujin admits that his attacks are indeed strong and fast, but he points out that his body position when striking makes his intentions obvious. Mugung concludes that he just needs to attack with more force and speed so no one can dodge. Partially agreeing, Mujin says that wouldn't be wrong if he were the strongest man in the world, but he's not. Using an example, he brings up the main character from the novel The Fall of the Sinister Faction. He explains that the warrior from the Sinister Faction was the strongest, with a technique described as indefensible, even when expected. In other words, until he becomes the best in the world, that logic doesn't apply to him. He advises that it's better to learn a few tricks, like deceiving an opponent in a game of rock, paper, scissors. Returning to the fight, Mugung tightens his grip on Muhuan's fist and asks if that's all he's got. Then he announces he's going to strike now, and he declares he will use the first form of the chain fist, challenging him to try and dodge it. Looking back, Mugung reflects on using a bit of trickery and wonders if he gets it now. He'd never considered it before, thinking it was cheating, but now he agrees that Mujin is right. So he offers to teach him something in return, and Mujin asks what it would be. Warning him, Mugung says not to think Mutai and his friends will be as easy as he was. Confused, Mujin doesn't understand the statement. Mugung reveals he wasn't fighting with his all when they faced off. He explains that in a real fight, opponents will use their clan styles and inner strength. Leading the others to a more secluded part of the temple, he says this spot should do. He clarifies that he didn't want any adults to see him using his clan style. He asks Muyul to keep watch, saying he's about to surprise them. Mujin asks him to show his style, and Mugung hopes this will finally earn him some respect. Concentrating, he begins to demonstrate his technique. With a shout, he unleashes his force. Watching closely, Mujin notices the technique is different from when he only used the chain fist, with remarkable power and speed. Looking deeper, he realizes the power isn't exactly what he expected, but it's still impressive for Mugung's age. He now understands why he said it would be dangerous to underestimate them, as each blow makes the air crackle. Anticipating the confrontation, he recognizes that Mutai and his gang will fight for real, using all their martial arts techniques. Stopping the motion abruptly before hitting Muyul, Mugung demonstrates control. He asks about the power, and Mujin replies that it's incredible, confirming he's the strongest kid there, but he notes that Mugung can't fully control his inner strength yet. Returning his focus to the fight, Mujin concludes that, in that case, the situation is manageable. Preparing himself, he gets into position for the opponent's attack. Rushing forward, the lackey charges to attack, warning that here he comes. As he watches him approach, Mujin realizes that to use their inner strength, they must stick to predefined forms and styles. In comparison, he understands that next to Mugung, the opponent's punch looks like a baby's, and as expected, he dodges the blow with ease. Understanding the situation, Mujin realizes the style used will be the chain fist, making the movements obvious. Shocked, the lackey notices his attack was dodged. Realizing this, he understands that Mujin didn't beat Mugung by luck and starts to back away. Rushing toward him, Mujin unleashes a series of quick strikes, asking if it's his turn to attack now. Raising his arms, the lackey protects his face. Noticing the guard, Mujin asks if he's only protecting his face. Then he hits him with a punch to the stomach. Meanwhile, Muhui raises his arms to attack Muyul, but he dodges and sweep kicks his opponent. Reflecting the scene from the last fight, Mujin's eye follows everything, and Mugung prepares a powerful punch against Muwan. Hitting the ground, the fist causes a large explosion. On the floor, Muwan struggles to get up. Watching it all, Mutai is completely shocked by the scene. He then starts to wonder if he's the villain now, seeing his fallen opponent act that way after bullying Mugyong for so long. Turning around, he tries to see how the others are doing. Mugung and Muyul have already defeated their opponents and comment that they didn't even need to worry, as the fight had barely begun. Hearing a strange noise, Mujin wonders how Mugyong is doing, since Mugung seems fine. Startled by the sound, he asks himself what that is, and then he sees Mugyong repeatedly beating Mutai on the ground. Rushing toward them, he yells for him to stop, that it's over. Seeing him like this, a sudden memory flashes into his mind. Realizing the reason, he understands why that name seemed familiar. The image of a boy smashing his opponent's face into the ground flashes through his mind, along with the savage look and the blood splattered across his face. Then Mujin realizes there's no doubt it's really him. Remembering, he recalls the worst character in the book, the villain with an insatiable bloodlust, and he realizes that this is Mugyong, the blood monk. Recalling one of his favorite childhood novels, Mujin doesn't remember everything, but one illustration is seared into his mind. The image showed a bloody monk screaming. He screamed about the evil of humanity that only he could purify with blood, and the scene before his eyes now reminds him of that same horrifying Mugyong from the novel. Questioning himself, he thinks about what he's done. His only goal was to boost the boy's self-esteem, but he ended up turning him into this. Perceiving the danger, he understands that if he doesn't stop him, Mutai could actually die. Running, he asks Muyul for help to intervene in the fight. Holding him together, the two restrain him as Mugyong screams for them to let go, because Mutai will go after his father. Finally stopping, panting, and with a bloody fist, everyone looks at Mutai's unconscious body, and Mujin realizes the situation could have been much worse. Kneeling on the ground, Mugyong begins to cry. Understanding the situation, Mujin realizes he's not the blood monk yet. The character in the book was portrayed only as a madman, without ever explaining how he became that way. He must have suffered an absurd amount of bullying until one day, he just snapped. Suddenly, Biopgang appears in the hallway and asks what's going on. Turning around, Mujin and Muyul realize they're doomed. Approaching, Biopgang demands they explain themselves immediately. Pointing to the boys on the ground, he asks Mujin what the hell is happening. He then turns to Mugung and questions him too, but the boy just hesitates. Shouting, Beopgang asks if he didn't just order them to explain themselves. Calling them by name, Beopgang lists each of the 4 boys. Turning Mugyong around, Mujin makes it so the Inquisitor can see him. Surprised by the action, Beopgang asks what he's doing. Just asking for his attention, Mujin tells him to look at Mugyong's body. Seeing the boy's back covered in bruises, Beopgang wonders what it is. With a serious expression, he asks them to tell him what happened. Explaining, Mujin says the bruises are the result of 2 months of beatings Mugyong has endured. He adds that on that day, they called him over to beat him up again, which is why they intervened. Questioning, Beopgang asks if that's true. Turning around, he asks the others if that's the truth. Ordering them, he tells Muhui and Muwan to stand up. Rushing to the scene, other monks arrive, asking what's happening after hearing the shouts. Trembling on the ground, the 2 boys can't answer. Observing the scene, one of the newcomers looks at Mutai's unconscious body. Then he asks what the hell is going on here. Turning to Mugyong, Beopgang asks him to tell what happened in his own words. Hesitating, the boy begins to tremble, not knowing what to say. Placing a hand on his shoulder, Mujin tells him to just tell the truth. Encouraging him, he says that brother Beopgang is a fair person, and tells him not to be afraid. Confirming, Mugyong says Mujin is right, and begins to tell them that Mutai, Muhui, and Muhuan have been beating him for 2 months. With a trembling voice, he breaks down in tears appears and explains everything he's been through. Watching the scene, other monks look on as Mujin and Muyul await Beopgang's reaction. Despite being agitated, Mugyong manages to convey the essence of the situation to the Inquisitor. Mujin reminds him of his own words, that Shaolin never turns its back on a disciple, feeling it was his duty to protect him. But Beopgang argues that those children are also Shaolin disciples. The boy asks if children who use threats to terrorize others can be considered disciples, and if that represents the true spirit of Shaolin. Agreeing, Beopgang says that he is correct. Arriving on the scene, Hyunsung states that they will investigate the matter, but the accusation will only be valid if what they say is true. The director of the Arhat Hall declares that if the story is true, those children will no longer be accepted as disciples. Expressing confidence, Mujin says he believes the investigation will be fair and open. But Hyunsung interrupts, questioning who would go so far against mere children, since the goal of martial arts is to subdue the opponent. Pointing, he indicates Mutai's unconscious body on the ground. Kneeling, Mugyong apologizes, and then raises his hand, taking the blame for what happened. Stepping forward, Mujin says it was all his fault, as he let his anger over what they did to Mugyong get the best of him. Trying to stop him, Mugyong tells Mujin not to take the blame for him, but moving ahead, Mujin insists that this all started because of him. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he realizes that if he betrays Mugyong now, there's no telling when he might turn into the Blood Monk, and that, instead, he could become the greatest ally of all. Beopgang explains that this is where they practice Buddhist meditation. He then informs Mujin that for the next 7 days, he must remain there and speak to no one as part of his ascetic practice. Announcing their arrival, he points to a cave and says the boy will carry out his punishment inside. He instructs him to sit upright, face the wall, and meditate without turning around, not even to eat or sleep. Agreeing, Mujin enters the cave to begin his meditation. He always believed that Gyeongga's works were set in the same world, but now a character from another story has appeared in his. He already knew that the return of the demonic master and the fall of the sinister faction took place in the same universe. The two protagonists were from the same era, but they rarely met because they were in different regions. But in the second half of one of the books, the new monk from the new Shaolin appears, making him realize his actions can affect other stories. He wonders if he's caused a butterfly effect, and if he's interfering with the development of the other characters. To get stronger, he'll need allies, but he only remembers a few of them from when they were young. It's been over a decade since he read the stories, and though he remembers the general outline, he can't recall the details. Reflecting, Mujin wonders if the story of the new Shaolin will still happen if the main characters become friends and everything gets mixed up. Already involved with Mugyong, the future bloody monk, he understands he needs to watch how things unfold. It's by facing the bloody monk that the protagonist of the return of the demonic master achieves enlightenment and grows stronger. But if the bloody monk is eliminated now, the other hero might never achieve enlightenment. This whole situation is too complex, and Mujin wonders where he should even begin to fix it. Outside, Beopgang watches him in silence. Noticing the boy's concentration on his punishment, he sees he does nothing else and finds it incredible that a 12-year-old has such focus. Considering the special techniques and talent he's already shown, he believes the boy might truly be special. Shortly before, in another location, Chief Master Hyunmun lets out a sigh. Lamenting, he says he failed to uphold his values, but Hyejong takes the blame for not controlling the situation. Changing the subject, Hyunmun asks his disciple to tell him what he discovered. Reporting, Hyejong says that all the novices were questioned and their testimonies were consistent, confirming that Mugyong was regularly bullied. This could become a stain on the Shaolin Order's name, making the atmosphere around the Arhat Hall grim. Arriving next, Beopgang announces himself as a second-generation disciple and is given permission to enter. Hyunsung then asks Hyunmun if he noticed the newcomer's hands, and the master cook confirms he did as well. One look at Mugyong's hands and face was enough to know he was the one who did that to Mute. Commenting, Hyunmun says this might be a blessing in disguise, something that could make up for everything, and that without Mujin, things could have been worse. The three men remain silent for a moment. Asking to speak, Beopgang requests the master's permission to say something on the matter, and it is granted. He states that the issue isn't about who failed whom, as everyone is to blame. He suggests that instead of lamenting, they should ensure it never happens again. The Chief Master asks if he has something in mind. Giving his humble opinion, Beopgang says this all happened because they need more training. He explains that the bullying was only possible because the children had too much spare energy, and to prevent it, their training must be intensified until they are too tired. Beopgang then asks for permission to proceed with his plan. Agreeing, Hyunmun accepts and leaves the matter in his and Hyejong's care, as he will be busy sorting things out in the coming days. He then informs them that the 3 guilty children will be punished, and that he will first pay a visit to the Hall of Discipline. Returning to the cave, Beopgang silently promises the master he will do his best with the children. Watching, he is impressed to see that Mujin hasn't moved for nearly an hour and a half. Deciding to go in, Beopgang almost does, but he changes his mind and decides to just check on him the next morning, telling Mujin to keep meditating while he takes care of his water and rations. The young monk remains silent inside the cave. Commenting to himself, Mujin says that the man is finally gone. Having spent 7 years in the special forces, he learned to sense people's presence in the mountains. Throwing himself on the ground, he wonders how he'll last 7 days in there without any protein. Lying down, he asks himself how long it's been since he's eaten meat. He remembers the fried chicken he ate right before arriving, with its crispy batter and juicy meat. As his hunger grows, all he can think is that he needs meat. Staring at the cave ceiling, he wonders where he could find some. Suddenly, he turns to the cave entrance and realizes that all he has to do is hunt. Nearby, a girl runs through the forest as a white rabbit flees from her. Leaping, the animal heads toward a rope trap while the young girl watches from her hiding spot. Hidden in the bushes, the girl watches the scene unfold. Appearing suddenly, Mujin snatches the rabbit in midair, announcing that he's got protein. He then celebrates the meat he's just secured. Hidden in the bushes, the girl silently watches the scene. Meanwhile, in Yichuan Prefecture, located a short distance from the Shaolin Temple, other events are unfolding. In the city, a group of Shaolin disciples is working to gather information. Asking the local residents for help, they try to understand the situation, and so, they find out what has been happening in the area. Sometime later, they arrive at the gates of the Seo Merchant Protectors and are invited inside. Leading the group, Hegol, Shaolin's head of external affairs, walks ahead. A man hurriedly introduces himself, greeting them and inviting them in. He identifies himself as Munpyeong Seo, the head of the organization and Mutai's father. Declaring his respect, he states it is an honor to meet the great master of the 5 peerless fists. Behind the monks, Mutai shrinks back and trembles. Harshly questioning them, Munpyeong Seo asks why his son is in that condition and demands an explanation. Hegol addresses Munpyeong Seo, the leader of the Seo Merchant Protectors. He declares that Mutai's condition is his own fault. He was bullying a peer instead of training his mind and body. Outraged, Munpyeong Seo tries to argue, but the monk cuts him off, stating their investigation uncovered more. They found that the merchant protectors are just a gang of thugs extorting money from the local community. Hegol expresses his disbelief, saying he can't fathom a Shaolin sect clan being involved in such wickedness. He orders his disciples to shut the place down and strip those men of their powers. In response, Munpyeong Seo commands his subordinates to stop the monks at once. Charging forward, he attacks the man with a flurry of blows, and he finishes with a direct punch to his opponent's chest. Looming over the fallen men, the monk observes that their powers are gone. Demanding reparations, he orders them to return the wealth they stole from the people. The defeated men look at each other, realizing the situation is a disaster. They don't know what to do. Approaching a group of people, Hegel asks if Gaon Bang is present. An older man steps forward, identifying himself as Gaon Bang, and asks how he can help. Recognizing Hegel, the man exclaims that he is from the temple. Humbly apologizing, Hegel reveals that the child victimized by Mutai was his son, Mugyeong. With a heavy voice, the man asks if his son was being bullied. He firmly states that no apology can make up for what happened. Far away, deep in the forest, Mujin stops and reflects on something. Finding a poorly made trap on the ground, he wonders who built it. Looking closer, he notices the trap looks like a bad copy of the one he made the day before. He wonders if someone is trying to copy him, and if there's someone else in these mountains. Suddenly, the young monk hears a sound from the bushes and turns around. Staring at each other through the foliage, the two stand motionless for a moment. Jumping up suddenly, the girl runs off, but Mujin shouts that he saw her. Running desperately, she begs him to wait. As she flees, she wonders if she managed to lose him. Reaching out, Mujin finally catches up to her. Falling together, they both tumble into the undergrowth. Realizing the situation, he notices he's fallen on top of a girl. Apologizing, she says she didn't mean to. Getting up, Mujin apologizes as well. Later, the girl eats a piece of roasted meat. He comments that she must have been starving since she was also trying to catch the rabbit for food. Sitting by the fire, she asks if monks are allowed to eat meat. Mujin answers vaguely, saying it depends, and tells her not to worry about it. Then he asks how she ended up in the mountains, since this is Shaolin Temple land. Looking down, she remains silent. A memory shows her begging her father not to leave her. In another memory, she asks why everyone hates her, and if it's her fault she exists. Sensing the sensitive sensitive nature of the topic, Mujin decides to change the subject. He asks for a favor, requesting she keep it a secret that he was out hunting and eating rabbits. The girl asks if it's because monks aren't supposed to eat meat, but he just says he has his reasons. In return, he offers to help her get back home, which surprises her. He explains that a shirtless monk with some influence will be passing by soon, and she can ask him for help. The girl asks how he knows the man is coming, and Mujin replies that he can just feel it. He instructs her to just wait in front of the cave as Beopgang approaches. As the girl approaches the man and asks for help, he's startled to see her. He asks what an outsider is doing there, and she explains that she got separated from her group. Beopgang agrees, saying he'll help her get back home. Suddenly, the man stares at her with a serious expression. Pointing to the cave, he asks if she happened to see a little boy around there. Inside the cave, Mujin feels a chill. Understanding his request for secrecy, the girl replies that she's scared to go near the cave and didn't see anything go in or out. Beopgang concludes that Mujin must be meditating and decides to come back later. He invites her to come with him, saying they can go down the mountain together to take her home. She thanks him. As they walk, he asks for her name, and the girl replies that she's called Seolhwa Ryu. Inside the cave, Mujin's ear twitches attentively. The young monk realizes the man is finally gone. Lying down on the ground, he comments that he's tired and has already forgotten the little girl's name. He concludes that, in the end, her name doesn't matter. Elsewhere, Mugyang greets Beopgang and asks if he needed something. The man replies that he needs to tell him something about his father. Beopgang told Mugyang that the Seo merchant commerce protectors, managed by his tormentor's father, had been shut down. He also informed him that the Shaolin had found another position for his father elsewhere. He then advises the boy to no longer worry about the outside world and to strive to become a true disciple. With determination, Mugyang faces the older man. The young monk then promises to do his best and vows to do whatever it takes to become a true disciple. On the fourth day, Mujin's Special Forces survival training helped him hunt for food. He recalls cooking for the young woman over a campfire, a careless mistake that could have easily given him away. After that day, he started doing everything in a nearby cave to leave no traces. He always made sure to clean up everything after he was done. To avoid leaving tracks, he would roast animals wrapped in a covered clay pit before eating them. That was his first meat-based meal since arriving at the temple, and it provided him with plenty of protein. Mujin wakes up before the morning bell and assumes the lotus position to meditate facing the wall. But he did this because he sensed a presence approaching the cave. Beopgang arrives at the cave and is impressed to see Mujin already awake and meditating. He enters wondering if the boy stayed up all night to repent. He then leaves a bamboo container and a bag of rations on the ground, and he's amazed that Mujin didn't break his meditation, not even with his presence. Beopgang leaves the water and food on the ground beside him. Only when the man walks away does Mujin look to confirm he's alone. He grabs the rations, thinking they're going too far by expecting children to live on this for a week. All they give him is water and meditation rations once a day, but he gets the rest of the nutrients he needs by hunting, and he's already used to the routine. The sixth day dawns in the forest, and inside the cave, he does what exercises he can to warm up, since the rule is to use protein and energy immediately. As he kept moving, he noticed something important. During the exercise, his breathing resembled the technique of inhaling and exhaling. To test this, he began combining void training with gymnastic techniques to create his own method. Mujin could feel the results of the training in his body, but he would only realize something else later. In fact, what he was doing was a form of fluid cultivation training. On the seventh day, Beopgang announces that the meditation training is over, and he can now stand up. Mujin asks if this means he can speak again, and the man confirms that he can. He then informs him that the morning training will start soon, and instructs him to return to the training grounds. As they walk, Mujin asks how the situation with Mugyang was resolved. Beopgang explains that they investigated Mutai's clan and uncovered the corruption of the Seo merchant commerce protectors. As a result, the clan was disbanded, their martial arts skills were nullified, and Mugyang's father was given a new position elsewhere. He also informs him that the training level was intensified over the last week, and that, for the sake of fairness to the other children, Mujin must now follow the Shaolin training methods. So Mujin decides he'll increase his own training level, but continue doing it his way. Beopgang simply replies that they will see, as they arrive at the Arhat Hall training ground. Upon entering, Muyul runs toward him to greet him. Mujin asks how everyone has been, and Muyul replies that it's been really tough. Mugyang comments that he almost gave up, but Mugung brags that it was a piece of cake for him. The young monk then turns to his friends. Master Hyejong announces that the morning training begins now and orders everyone to form a line. A disciple throws a bag on the ground, and Mujin wonders what those things are. The boys recognize the sandbags and start tying them to their bodies. The master orders them to grab the bags and return to their positions, making Mujin wonder if this is how they made the training harder. Besides Mujin's return, it was the same morning training as always. With the traditional training now even harder, the children were drenched in sweat, so Mujin used the sandbags as dumbbells to continue his personal training. The sandbags aren't balanced and the grip isn't the best, but he doesn't plan on being a bodybuilder, so this was perfect for him. Two disciples observe that Mujin is acting as if nothing has changed, doing everything his own way. Beopgang walks toward Mujin, and the other boys believe he's finally going to put him in his place. As he gets closer, Beopgang recalls that the training has gotten harder. He realizes that Mujin is pushing himself much harder than everyone else. Then he feels a heavy energy emanating from the young monk, and Beopgang recognizes it as fluid cultivation. Fluid cultivation only becomes possible once someone gets used to gathering qi, a method of accumulating energy while in motion. The techniques that use the qi gathered this way allow one to escape normal physical limits and perform superhuman feats, like shattering a boulder. It also becomes possible to fly through the skies, move at high speeds, and use many other techniques. And yet, something catches his attention. Mujin comments that he was getting tired of bodyweight exercises, and it was nice they provided weights. He then starts doing a triceps extension with the sandbags. While all the other disciples struggled with the training, Mujin was the only one using the sandbags for modern weightlifting, feeling his muscles respond. The boy felt satisfied with the result. Alarmed by the strange scene, the other boys stare at him and wonder what's wrong with him. But Beopgang saw something more in Mujin. He observes the scene intently. The man realizes it's fluid cultivation and wonders when the boy learned the technique. Beopgang then approaches and asks for a moment of his attention. He sits down and asks Mujin to join him for a moment. Master Hyejong confirms that Beopgang was right. He recognizes the technique as fluid cultivation and wonders how long Mujin has been able to use it. The boy remembers learning it during his time in the cave, but he knows he can't admit to disobeying his punishment. So he decides to lie, claiming it was his first time trying. He invents a story about his clan's breathing techniques and his excitement to be exercising again. He explains that he simply combined his clan's method with the technique of breathing in and out, and that was the result. The explanation leaves the two men completely stunned. Hyejong reflects that fluid cultivation is normally only possible after making progress in the training of the void. Beopgang adds that although the training of the void can be mastered in a few years, very few disciples have ever managed to achieve fluid cultivation. That's why, after a solid foundation in the path of the void, the disciples learn the next technique in mental training. Instead of dedicating 12 hours a day to learning fluid cultivation, they could spend a fraction of that time learning multiple other mental techniques to control qi. But if someone learned the path of the void and fluid cultivation in a matter of days like Mujin, they would gather internal qi at an extraordinary rate. So Hyejong wonders how quickly the boy will master more advanced mental techniques if he learned fluid cultivation so easily. The master composes himself and prepares to ask Mujin a question. Hyejong asks if this means he can use fluid cultivation whenever he wants. Mujin replies that he can only do it when he uses his clan's training techniques. The young monk then asks if he can go back to training, and Hyejong allows it. He runs back to the training yard. The masters comment that they got excited over nothing, and Hyejong allows it. He runs back to the training yard. The masters comment that they got excited over nothing. Mujin turns to Mugyong and asks if they should continue. He then approaches and asks the others if they're practicing the four-limb extension technique, and Muyul confirms they are. Muyul explains that the other two seemed interested, so he taught them. Mugyong comments that Muyul is a good teacher, and that he feels better after practicing, although it still hurts. Mujin remembers teaching Muyul how to stretch, and is surprised by how quickly he learned. He hadn't paid much attention to Muyul, as he's not mentioned in the books of Gyeongga, but he realizes his technique is peculiar. The technique is skillful, yet simple, and he wonders if that's why he never became a master, since he probably doesn't even know about meridians. Mujin turns to Mugyong, deciding he'll figure it out later. He then addresses the boy and asks about him. Mujin asks if Muyul has been teaching him and says he wants to see what he's learned. Mugyong struggles to count the exercise movements while being encouraged. They follow the military calisthenics routine, and one of them asks if it's normal to feel so much pain in his side. Mujin corrects the other's posture, telling Mugyong not to clench his fists and Mugyong to straighten his arm. He then announces the next exercise will be breathing. The boys line up and follow the count for the breathing exercise. Mugyong comments comments that this one is easy and that everyone is doing well. He then watches Mu Yul, reflecting on the time the boy spent with Mu Jin. He demonstrates impressive flexibility, surprising the other monks with his skill. Mu Jin reflects on Mu Yul, the boy who knocked him out of the running to become a true disciple. He observes Mu Yul, skillful but simple-minded. Then he remembers Mu Gyung, who beat the crap out of Mu Tae. Mu Gyung concludes that while everyone might be impressive, he will do his best to keep up with them. Mu Jin easily lifts the new sandbags during his morning training. In his free time, he's been practicing cultivating his internal energy. He also leads other monks in stretching exercises, making sure they keep their backs straight. Two monks comment to each other, one asking if the other has noticed anything about Mu Jin. One asks if the boy's shoulders don't look broader, but his companion isn't sure. They wonder if it's because of the strange exercises he does. Then, the 10th day arrives. Master Haejong announces to the novices that it's time to move on to internal energy training. He then calls a disciple forward to demonstrate the exercise. He begins to explain the first form, detailing how internal strength should be drawn from the chi center. He then instructs that the energy must be split and sent toward the shoulders and collarbone. Concentrating, Mu Jin gathers the energy in his chi center and then raises it. He remembers the instruction to split it in a 7:3 ratio. The boy takes the final stance of the chain link fist technique, and with a swift movement, he executes the first form. Mu Jin registers the sensation in his hand, feeling the internal strength fortify every part of his body. He understands that the reason not to send all the energy to one side is to maintain balance. He then realizes it makes sense to distribute the energy to other parts of the body. Master Hejong explains that to use the technique correctly, one must also distribute chi to the lower body. Mu Jin confirms he was right, but if that's the case, a new idea pops into his mind. The energy shouldn't just be split between the arms, but also the legs, requiring control over the entire body. Looking at his own arm, the technique seems much more complicated than it first appeared. He then wonders how much training would be needed to use all of this in a real fight. For now, he watches the other monks as they try to practice. Mu Yul moves awkwardly and asks if he's doing it right. Mu Jin approaches and tells his friend to wait a moment. He asks what Mu Yul is doing, and the boy replies that he couldn't remember the order. The young monk describes the wrong order of meridians, but is corrected on the proper sequence. He gets the direction of the energy wrong again, and Mu Jin corrects him, reminding him that he's right-handed. Finally, Mu Yul remembers what was said, as Mu Jin watches him in silence. He tells the boy not to worry about the names of the meridians, and to just bring his internal strength to a point in his stomach. After that, Mu Jin instructs him to move the energy to another point, and then to his shoulder. Mu Yul manages to perform the movement and celebrates because it's so much easier that way. Mu Jin advises him to ask again if he gets confused, as he has a feeling he might forget. Immediately, the young monk moves awkwardly and already asks where the energy should go next. That's when Mu Jin realizes his friend has the memory of a goldfish. Master Hejong and the second-generation disciples taught a different fundamental form each day. After that, they continued to work with each child according to their individual needs. And this training continued for 70 days, leading up to the present. One by one, all the young monks, including Mu Jin, mastered the 10 fundamental forms of the chain link fist. Mu Gung tells one of the boys who is doing push-ups that 20 seconds have passed. The boy gets up from the floor. Mu Jin turns and asks if they should do some squats. During morning practice, Beopgang watches everyone pushing themselves. Suddenly, he wonders who's breathing so loudly. His gaze shifts to a small group of monks doing squats with sandbags. He's then surprised to see the number of sandbags Mu Jin is lifting. The boy's strength and muscles are remarkable for his age. His physical ability is far beyond that of the other novices. Beopgang reflects that the boy achieved all this in just 2 months, wondering if he's been right all along. He remembers when Mu Jin advised him on the exercises and his own training. Sitting alone, he questions if the Shaolin training methods are wrong. Master Hyunsung approaches and asks why he's still there since training is over. Standing up to greet him, Beopgang notices that something seems to be troubling him. Hyunsung then advises him to share his burdens to make them lighter. He asks again what's troubling him so much, and Beopgang replies that his concern is about Mu Jin, saying he doesn't understand him. Beopgang informs Mu Jin that Master Hyunsung would like to speak with him. Other monks react, with one asking what the boy did this time, and telling him to apologize. Beopgang then hurries him along, saying the master is waiting, and Mu Jin follows. Once inside a room, Mu Jin wonders if he did something he wasn't aware of. He then questions what Hyunsung, the master of the Arhat Hall, could possibly want with him. Hyun-sung reflects on Mujin's drastic improvement in such a short time. He could sense the boy's temperament and potential, but Baeopgang's concern intrigued him. So the master orders Baeopgang to summon Mujin. Hyun-sung explains that this isn't something that can be resolved between just the two of them. It would be better to meet Mujin in person and discuss the matter directly with him. Mujin presents himself before the master, who is seated at a table. Looking at the man, he wonders what is happening. Mujin wonders why he was called just to be stared at in silence when he should be training. He feels it's not just the way the master is looking at him, but that he's being sized up from head to toe. The boy feels that every aspect of him is being judged. He then flexes his muscles and states that he's not yet in his best shape for a competition. Hyun-sung asks what he's doing, and Mujin replies that he was just striking a pose. The master comments that it's been a while since they've talked, and the boy agrees they haven't spoken since the incident. Mujin recalls the fight, and asks if the summons has anything to do with that. But Hyun-sung takes a sip of tea and says, no, he just needed to see for himself. Hyun-sung states that now that he's seen him, he's sure of something, and Mujin asks what he's sure of. The master comments that he has developed much faster than the other novices, and that the rumors about his strength were true. But he reveals that this isn't the only reason he called him, asking if his remarkable development is due to his clan's training methods. The boy predicts this will only lead to trouble, and that they will ask him to train the Shaolin way. Mujin asks if the master wanted to see if his training methods are truly better than the Shaolin way, but he denies it. Then Hyun-sung explains that Shaolin isn't such an inflexible place, and that he'd like to suggest something. The young monk remembers Master Hyejong yelling about the training, so he asks what he had in mind. The master explains that the reason Shaolin has survived for 1,000 years is by adapting, but Mujin says he doesn't understand. So Hyun-sung proposes that if the boy can prove the value of his clan's methods, they can incorporate them into their own. He's referring to those peculiar training methods, leaving Mujin surprised. The boy wonders what this means and if they will really accept his training methods. As the master of the Arhat Hall, Hyun-sung was a monk in search of enlightenment, willing to make difficult decisions for the development of Shaolin. Introducing Mujin's training methods was a risk, and it would be better to test them first on the young disciples of the Arhat Hall. If something went wrong, he would be punished, but he decided it was worth the risk to continue developing Shaolin's rich history. After all, if the training method was truly effective, it could very well strengthen the temple's foundation. Mujin refuses and asks why it has to be him. Master Hyun-sung glares at him sternly. He then yells back, asking who else it could be, and the boy argues there are over 70 novices, and he has his own training to do. Besides, he comments that the other disciples treat him like a freak and wouldn't accept his instructions. In truth, it would be good for him to train the novice disciples, since he is now part of Shaolin, but he didn't want to have to use those brats. Mujin then says that if they really want to test his methods, he has some conditions. Later, the young monks are sleeping soundly in their rooms, and suddenly the boys are woken up by a shout to get up. They run out of the room, and one of them asks if it's already time for morning training, as the bell hasn't rung yet. A voice orders them to run to the training grounds, as they didn't come to Shaolin to sleep. The monks stand outside, not understanding what's happening. Then they see Mujin standing in the courtyard with Master Hyejong and Baeopgang. The master explains that the reason they were woken up early is because they've added some warm-up exercises to the morning training. Furthermore, Master Hyejong announces that the morning training sessions will now be led by Mujin. As expected, the other novices don't react well to the news, since they are the same age and he isn't popular among them. But now that he's in charge, the boy knows he can't show any weakness. So he yells for their attention, activating his instructor mode. Mujin announces that, from this day on, morning training will follow his clan's methods. He declares that during this time, he is no longer one of them, and that everyone must refer to him as instructor. Watching from a distance, Master Hyejong comments that the little rascal never ceases to amaze. Baeopgang notices the determined look in the boy's eyes. Mute scoffs at the situation, while another monk smirks behind him. The group scoffs at the idea, questioning why they should listen to him. Mujin asks if they're laughing. He challenges them to see if they'll still be laughing by the end of that morning's training, making the others back down. The young instructor calls for everyone who has a problem with him and was laughing to step forward. When the group steps forward, Mujin challenges them, promising that if he falters for even a moment, he will give up his position and join them as just another disciple. Mujin positions himself in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the monks, and asks if that's all of them. He then declares he will face them all at once and prepares for the fight. At his command, The boys charge towards him. The group attacks him simultaneously with a flurry of punches. They suddenly stop, and one of the monks asks where he went. Mujin reappears, crouched between them, and asks if that's all they've got. With a swift move, he positions himself behind one of the attackers. He then grabs him in an arm lock, while the others yell for the boy to do something. Mujin prepares the chain link fist and attacks the two monks in front of him. Then all the attackers fall to the ground, defeated. He looks at the rest of the group and asks if anyone wants more. The other disciples remain silent, and Mujin states he was serious. Pointing at them, he declares that from now on he's in charge of the training, and everyone must call him instructor. He starts counting for push-ups, warning that if anyone's belly touches the ground, they'll get double the sandbags. The young monks do the exercise, and Mujin instructs that on 2, they must extend their arms and rise. Watching the scene, Beopgang reflects on how skilled that little rascal is. He concludes Mujin must have had teaching experience at home, and the training proceeds smoothly. But he didn't supervise all 70 disciples alone, making Mugyong, Mugung, and Muyul his assistant instructors. The new assistants help correct the others' posture, allowing Mujin to better supervise and train everyone. He believes that teaching other kids their age will help Mugyong with his self-esteem. Beopgang, almost more of a soldier than a monk, found the ideal training method thanks to Mujin. He reflects on how those kids were just playing around a short while ago, and now they're training seriously. Beopgang advises Mujin to go easy at first and be tough if they cross the line, while the boy shouts, asking if everyone has learned their lesson. And even though they're novices, the results come quickly, with their strength and muscle tone visibly improving. Mujin approaches the adult monks and asks if they managed to do what he had asked. Over time, they saw the clear effects of the training and came to trust the boy completely, confirming that everything was arranged. He then celebrates, as the equipment has finally arrived. It was what he had asked the master for in exchange for teaching the children. A complete weightlifting set with a bench, barbell, and plates. The boy notices that, except for the barbell, everything is made of wood, but believes it should work since he can use the sandbags as dumbbells. Even with his 3 little helpers, there were limits to teaching over 70 kids, and it was starting to affect his personal training, so all that equipment was made at his personal request. Mujin gets excited about being able to do the 3 big lifts in Shaolin, and guarantees it will make the kids stronger. Through constant training, he reached a new level, in fact several new levels. The barbell and plates weighed almost 200 pounds, and at just 13, Mujin was already growing fast. He then starts doing a set of squats with the barbell on his back. Mujin flexes his arm, calculating that his total for the 3 big lifts must be around 500 pounds. He flexes his muscles, believing he could probably hit over 650 pounds for a 1-rep max, and that's how things went. The seasons changed from fall to snow, and from snow to the burst of green in spring. 20 of the novices left the Shaolin Temple. Those were the ones who couldn't master the martial arts within the year. Master Hyejong informs Hyunsong that nearly 50 children remained, almost triple the last time. Hyunsong laughs and says it's all thanks to Mujin. The master becomes one of his biggest supporters and asks if they can get more equipment for the Arhat Hall. Having seen the clear benefits of Mujin's training methods, he wanted to get as much equipment as possible. But no matter how large the Shaolin Temple was, there was a limit to what was possible within the budget. So Hyunsong reflects that, after 50 years of seeking enlightenment, the admission test can't come soon enough. That was the final test the novices faced to be selected as disciples. If the test proved the effectiveness of the training methods, the Arhat Hall could get all the equipment they dreamed of. That year, Mujin hit puberty, grew over 4 inches, and his total on the 3 big lifts was almost 900 pounds for 12 reps. Reaching almost 900 pounds after a year and 9 months might seem slow to some, but Mujin wasn't a bodybuilder, he was a martial artist. Muscles that are too large can hinder martial arts movements, so he only gained enough bulk. His physique was comparable to a TV celebrity famous for being in shape. Mujin was no longer built like coach Gangyok Choi, now he was defined like a martial artist, with every muscle clearly visible. At the peak of the boys' training, Hyunsong ventures outside the Arhat Hall. He introduces himself to the abbot monk, informing him of the admission test in 5 days, and is invited inside. The abbot says he's already received news that he brought most of the children to the admission test. Hyunsong attributes the success to the abbot monk's profound virtue. The abbot comments that he must be feeling quite confident, and Hyunsong confirms he has reason to be. He then bows and states that he humbly believes this admission test will be very different from the others. That was Hyunqin, the abbot of Shaolin. high-ranking members from all halls gather at the Arhat Hall for the admission test. Thanks to Mujin, 49 children make it to the test, with 42 remaining after a few dropped out. Everyone had gathered to see this incredible result for themselves, and Hyunsung agrees with another master that it wouldn't be right to keep it to themselves. A monk questions if the high number of remaining children is due to Master Hyunsung's kindness, but Hegel disagrees. Hyegol, the head of external affairs, explains that the master himself told him this crop of disciples is exceptionally skilled. He then invites him to see for himself. The other monk is surprised by the physique of the children who will be taking the admission test. He comments that by their appearance they look like second-generation disciples, and Hyegol confirms that this proves something, and that's why he's so confident. Hyunsung stands before everyone and thanks them for taking the time out of their schedules to attend. He announces he'll be brief, since there are so many children, and that they will begin immediately. Mujin tells Mugung not to be afraid, and Mugyong not to be nervous. He then turns to Muyul, but decides to let it go. He turns to the group and tells them to have fun. A young monk rushes forward for the challenge. The test is watched by the future masters of each hall, who will choose a child as a third-generation disciple. Usually, second-generation disciples challenge the novices just to get a feel for their skills, but sometimes they're surprised. The boy has already exchanged over 20 blows and still looks strong. The abbot remarks that the children's skill level is impressive, but Hyunsung replies that he hasn't seen even half of it. He then asks the abbot to wait and see more before judging. Hyunsung shows no anxiety, revealing how much he trusts those children. The bell rings and the next disciple is called the novice Muyul. Mujin approaches his friend and asks if he remembers what he told him. Muyul confirms he should just go out there, relax, and have fun. The boy then smiles confidently. Now in position in the courtyard, he announces he's ready. The challenge begins, and Muyul moves in to land the first blow on his opponent. The older disciple observes, realizing how many forms he has already mastered, and with that, he prepares for the next phase of the fight. The older disciple decides to test Muyul's ability to adapt and apply martial arts techniques, and the boy rushes forward upon seeing an opening. With a quick spin, the senior disciple attempts a counterattack, but Muyul dodges and launches his own strike. The monk blocks the attack, wondering how a novice disciple can be so fast. Regardless, he readies a punch and lunges forward, certain he's got him, but the boy skillfully dodges underneath the blow. The masters watching from the balcony react with surprise. One of them remarks that the boy's movement is incredible, almost like an animal instinct, and that he's able to react to those instincts with amazing flexibility and form. Then Hyegol tells his disciple Beophion to watch closely. He declares that this child will be the next disciple under his tutelage, as he could easily master all 5 fists of Shaolin. The challenge ends, and Mujin reflects that Muyul's incredible flexibility is an impressive skill. He remembers how he made Muyul practice transitioning from one form to another without worrying about the flow. As a result, all the movements and the flow of his inner force were programmed into his muscle memory. The abbot asks Hyunsung how he managed to train the children to this level, and he replies that the abbot hasn't seen anything yet. Mujin approaches and tells Mugung just not to get nervous. The boy readies himself for the fight and vehemently denies he was nervous. The masters on the balcony question if that can really be a novice disciple. The second-generation disciple stares at the size of his opponent. He's surprised by the boy's height. Mugung reflects on the 2 years of intense training he went through to get to this day. The challenge begins, and he runs towards his opponent. Mugyong asks Mujin how he thinks Mugung will do. Mujin explains that despite his strength, he lacked flexibility, but his extreme work ethic helped him overcome that. This combination of training turned Mugung into a high-damage tank, and he strikes his opponent. The older disciple is pushed back by the impact. He realizes he can't hold his inner force against so much power, so he decides to use a burst of energy to see how the fight unfolds. The older monk concentrates the force in his fist and delivers a direct counterattack to Mugung's chest. The opponent throws a powerful punch, but the boy prepares to dodge. Surprised, the masters on the balcony watch the fight. One of them comments that the child isn't just powerful, but also mixes feints into his combat, being the only one to fight on equal terms. Then Master Haidam approaches the other disciples and remarks that it's not bad at all. They greet him, and the master asks if that child caught his attention. Haidam observes that the boy strives to minimize unnecessary movements, which is evidence of hard work. He states that at this level, the young monk could very well become the standard bearer of Shaolin. Aware that everyone is watching him, Mugung prepares to show his strength, but he gets careless and is hit by a direct punch to the stomach. From the balcony, Master Hayadam and the disciples watch the scene in silence. A master comments that he still relies on flourishes, and Hayadam agrees that the child still has much to learn. After the fight, Mujin tells Mugung not to get down, because everyone makes mistakes. Then Mugyong is called for the next challenge. Mujin watches approaches him with a serious expression on his face. Mugyong prepares for the challenge, being more dangerous than Muyul or Mugung. He attacks the opponent with an uninterrupted sequence of techniques. The older disciple wonders how many techniques he's learned, as if there's nothing he doesn't know. Mujin watches the fight intently, hoping his friend keeps it up. Aside from a small mistake at the beginning, the fight is going well, but a problem starts to emerge. As the challenge dragged on, Mugyong began to get carried away by the thrill of combat. One of the masters declares that the challenge is complete, but the boy ignores the call and continues to attack his opponent. He clenches his fist and wonders about this new feeling of joy. Then he completely gives in to the pleasure of the fight. Mujin recognizes his friend's berserker rage state, and as a murderous intent takes him over, Mujin yells for him to snap out of it. Sitting on a rooftop, a man drinks from a gourd and remarks that the noise made him think the abbot was throwing a party, but he guesses it's the admission test. He watches an agile monk dodge a larger opponent and comments that the big guy would be perfect for Hayadam. Then his attention turns to another monk who blocks a strike with a smile, and he expresses interest. The observer on the roof gets excited and declares that monk is perfect. Decided, he leaps from the roof towards the courtyard, claiming the fighter is his. In the courtyard, one of the monks is thrown hard to the ground. His opponent prepares to use the 18 Dharma hands technique. From a balcony, the abbot and other masters watch the scene unfold. The blow hits the ground, causing a massive collision, but a hand intercepts the attacker's arm before he can complete the move. The man from the roof appears mid-fight, holding the aggressor while calmly taking a drink. One of the monks recognizes him as Brother Hegwan, and he confirms his identity. From the balcony, Haidam scolds him for daring to drink inside the temple. Hegwan tosses the gourd back to him and asks Brother Haidam not to play such games. Haidam catches the gourd and, realizing it only contained water, continues his lecture, saying that while they appreciate hard work, there are lines that cannot be crossed. Higwan turns to everyone and announces that he felt he should be the one to take in this boy. One of the masters comments to another that the boy is truly capable, but he adds that someone needs to teach him to control his bloodlust, suggesting Higwan, the leader of the Death Demon Brigade. The Death Demon Brigade is the only group in Shaolin exempt from the vow of non-killing, dedicated to protecting the populace from evil forces. The abbot agrees it might be for the best, as under Hyegwan's tutelage, the young man could learn to control his impulses. Hyegwan approaches Mugyong and, patting his head, says it looks like he's one of them now. The young monk reacts to the touch. Hyegwan is amused by the reaction and remarks that he's finally found a disciple wilder than himself. After choosing Mugyong as his disciple, he simply leaps back over the wall, losing all interest in the rest of the test. The situation leaves everyone confused for a moment, but soon things calm down and the tests continue. The second-generation disciple testing everyone wonders who the hell he'll face next. Then the novice Mujin is called forward. Mugung analyzes the new opponent and notes that while he doesn't look special, he also has the build of a brute force fighter. On the balcony, one of the masters tells the abbot that if he had to choose the best disciple, he would select that boy without hesitation. The abbot asks for the reason behind his choice, and the master explains that Mugyong could one day master all of Shaolin's techniques, but he asserts that Mujin is the child who could take Shaolin to the next level, as the young man prepares for combat. In a memory, Beopgang finds Mujin meditating and calls out to him. The boy explains he was having trouble with some techniques, so he decided to meditate for a bit, but Beopgang asks about the techniques he had already mastered. Mujin clarifies he was trying to solve a problem with his cultivation, and the master asks if he has achieved a breakthrough in the path of emptiness. He replies that he hasn't yet, as he's been having trouble controlling his ki on certain occasions, and Beopgang asks when this happens. The young monk reveals it occurs when he's sleeping, or when he's not breathing. Beopgang is confused and asks how that could be a problem. Mujin explains that there are many moments when one stops breathing, like when eating or drinking, and the master understands that the concern is about how to gather chi in those moments. With his arms crossed, Beopgang concludes that geniuses are strange and that he had never thought of something like that. Then an idea comes to him. He turns and asks Mujin if he has ever heard of the iron shirt technique. The boy describes it as a third-rate technique used by thugs. Beopgang explains that, originally, the iron shirt was a famous foundational Shaolin technique for hardening the body, but it eventually fell out of use. He says the technique wasn't useful against elite masters, as it couldn't stop their sword or fist techniques. Beopgang explains that the world believes the iron shirt technique is for hardening the skin, but that's only half the truth. The true technique, he reveals, is to absorb chi through the skin. Mujin reacts to the revelation, and the master explains that the known version came from a disciple who didn't fully master it. The young man then realizes that if he masters the technique, he could absorb chi at any time, even while eating or sleeping. He imagines that if he trains fluid cultivation on top of that, the effect would be multiplied. After concluding that the secret is absorbing qi and that skin hardening is a side effect, he considers it useless. But he pauses for a moment, reconsidering. The young man gets the idea to combine the foundational Shaolin technique with the modern knowledge of gymnastics he learned. With a clenched fist, he realizes he might have found a good use for it after all. To become a third-generation disciple, one had to master 3 martial techniques, and Mujin had already mastered each of them to the 10th level. But since he learned much faster than the others, he quickly ran out of things to learn. He managed to get far by filling in the gaps with his knowledge of gymnastics, but he would need to create his own style for the future. Biopgang watches his disciple and believes that if anyone can find a way, it's Mujin. Back in the conversation, Mujin enthusiastically asks the master to teach him the iron shirt technique. In the present, Muyul observes Mujin in the testing courtyard and asks Mugung what he's doing now. Mugung replies that he's always been like this, and Muyul agrees that it's not abnormal for him. The young monk hits himself to understand the feeling of the impact and get used to the iron shirt technique. He then focuses on figuring out how to make the absorbed qi work in his favor. The opponent is surprised by the amount of qi coming from a novice. He combines the cultivation qi and uses it in his own way. Mujin announces that it's time to show off his new martial arts fusion. The abbot reflects that the phrase, taking Shaolin to the next level, is usually reserved for talking about someone else. In the distance, a master and his disciple announce they have finally reached the Arhat Hall. Apologizing for wanting to see this particular test, the master hears Biopjian reply that it was nothing. He continues, saying that carrying him made the walk longer, but he just saw it as a longer stroll. Calling them to come closer, the elder is warned by Biopjin that he won't be able to see much from that distance. Remarking that he's too inexperienced to judge a disciple, his master states it's better for Biopjin to watch for them and decide. From the crowd, they watch as Mujin is called to step forward. Impressed by the young man's perfect form, the old master wonders if this is what fluid cultivation looks like. Mugung prepares for combat. As the fight begins, Mujin rushes toward his opponent. Mugung is surprised by the explosive speed and questions what techniques this kid knows. Mujin combines the 9 Palaces Steps technique with the Guanyin Palm. Mugung sees the heart center fist coming his way. Preparing himself, he adjusts his body to receive the impact of the blow. Combining the 9 Palaces Steps and the Autumn Wind Leg to strengthen his lower body, he uses the Guanyin Palm for core and power enhancement. Finally, he adds the first form of the Chain Link Fist to strengthen his shoulders, combining the essence of all techniques. With the impact, his opponent is pushed back, revealing his hybrid martial art. Mujin then moves in to deliver his second attack. Mugung looks at his own hands, having never felt anything like that in 10 years of blocking attacks. Preparing again, he sees his opponent's second strike approaching. Mugung moves to the side, dodging the punch, but the blow was a feint, and Mujin surprises him with a quick finger jab. Then, he throws a real punch, which is intercepted by Mugung's fist. Mugung is surprised by the strength of his adversary's grip. Incapable of holding back, Mujin unleashes a flurry of blows against him. Watching the fight, the master wonders how it's possible to generate so much power with so little experience. Limiting himself to fundamental techniques of fist, palm, leg, finger, hand, and foot, his attacks remain simple. Even using basic upper and lower body techniques, he is overpowering his opponent. Then, the master realizes that instead of advancing to the next skill, he combined the basic techniques into new ones. Declaring that the boy is on the path to becoming a great master, he questions if he is walking the same path as him. Turning to his disciple, he calls him by name, Biopjion. Asking for help, he requests to be taken to the center of the training ground. Smiling, Mujin feels excited to finally be in the Murim. Recalling almost 2 years of training, he remembers never being able to show his true strength. Now, he can finally test his full strength without worrying about his opponent in a real challenge. Feeling the tension of facing someone strong, he also experiences the joy of putting everything he's learned to the test. With his senses sharpened, the world seems to slow down around him, but he notices his opponent retreating and questions why he's backing away. Confused, Mujin turns around, trying to understand what's happening. Then, he notices the crowd parting like the Red Sea for Biopjion, who walks through carrying the master. From the balcony, the abbot and Hiadam react upon seeing the newcomer. Leaping down to the courtyard, they greet Master Yongwang, calling it an honor. Bowing in respect, all the disciples leave Mujin confused about who this man could be. Approaching, the abbot hears Master Yongwang apologize for interrupting the test, but replies that he surely has his reasons. Explaining himself, Master Yongwang says he came closer to ask the child a question. leaving Mujin confused. Next, he asks the young man to remove his robes. Although not entirely satisfied with his own physique, Mujin takes off his clothes, as he has nothing to be ashamed of. The crowd comments on his physical form, considering it ideal for a martial artist. Then, the master asks if he specifically trained his body for the 6 fundamental Shaolin forms he used. Surprised, Mujin wonders how he could possibly know. Considering the vast number of Shaolin techniques, he asks why Mujin chose this method instead of learning others. Explaining himself, the young man says that since he's not very smart, he found the techniques that worked best for him and combined them. After all, he isn't the original Mujin from the story. Lacking the confidence that he could learn advanced techniques as easily as Mugyong, he made his choice. So, he developed a hybrid technique, combining the basic forms into an effective method. Needing only to learn how to move ki around his body in the right proportions, he focused on that. And to withstand the power of the amplified ki, he made his body strong enough to handle it. Observing, the master comments that he mastered the autumn wind step and used extreme discipline to contain the overwhelming power. In conclusion, he states that in essence, the young man created his own martial art, leaving Mujin stunned. Communicating his wish to the abbot to place Mujin as Beopgyan's disciple, Master Hyungwang is asked if he means to take him as a 3rd-generation disciple. Later that night, Mujin finds himself completely confused by the recent events. Meanwhile, in the Arhat Hall Master's chamber, Mugung questions what's so special about that guy. Reflecting, he thinks that the master didn't seem to be in good shape, let alone a regular Shaolin practitioner. He also doesn't recall hearing that name in the Gyeongga universe, just as the abbot enters the room. So, Mugung asks the abbot if he knows Master Hyungwang, but the temple leader says he does not. Elsewhere, the abbot tells Mujin he called him to ask a few questions and tell him things he needs to know. He then reveals that these things are about the venerable Hyungwang, his new master. The abbot begins his tale, saying that at one point, Master Hyungwang was considered the greatest warrior in the world. He recalls that when his generation were only 2nd disciples, Master Hyungwang, at just 32, had already achieved something remarkable. Back then, he was about to surpass the previous generation's level, and the entire temple predicted he would become the greatest in the world within 10 years. So, Mujin asks how someone like that ended up in his current state. Revealing the reason, the abbot says it all happened because of the demonic cult's attack. The young man reacts with surprise at the mention of the demonic cult. Confirming this, the abbot explains that during their peaceful time as 2nd disciples, the cult attacked them. Sworn to protect all life, the Shaolin monks went to war to stop them, but terrible things can happen on the battlefield. Considered too precious for Shaolin's next generation, Master Hyungwang was forbidden from going to war. In his place, the masters of the Gong generation and the first disciples of the Gyum generation went off to fight. Aware that the main forces were fighting elsewhere, the demonic cult sent its elite squad to Shaolin, where only the master and the young disciples remained. But at that time, the master was already one of the greatest warriors on earth, and the elite squad couldn't defeat him. However, the 2nd and 3rd generation disciples who stayed at the temple were no match for the demonic cult. With no chance against the invaders, the young disciples were easily overwhelmed. So, the enemies used this weakness to their advantage. During the invasion, one of the enemies attacks Master Hyungwang. Realizing the young disciples were in danger, he turns immediately. Leaping across the temple, the master tries to reach them as fast as he can. The enemy's charge results in a violent attack. Wounded, Hyungwang stands in front of the disciples and vows that the invaders will not leave this place. Throwing himself at them repeatedly, he tries to save them at all costs. And with each charge, he suffers more and more fatal wounds. The abbot laments that if they had simply died and the master had been spared, everything would be different. Mujin then asks if those injuries are the cause of the master's current state, and the abbot confirms they are. The young man then deduces that all he needs is treatment and offers to help. Surprised, the abbot asks if he truly believes he can heal him. Intervening, another master says that even the great elixir failed and asks what makes him think he could succeed. Mujin clarifies that it would be impossible to fully restore the master's inner strength or his physical recovery to its former state, but he believes that, at the very least, he could make him walk again. Mentioning the subject, Master Hyunsung comments that perhaps Mujin heard from the director about brother Beopgang's knee problems. So, the abbot asks if the methods used on Beopgang would work on the master, and Hyunsung confirms with a nod. They had already seen how Beopgang's knees were healed, and the training method that had elevated the disciples' skills. The abbot asks if all of that is true, and the master replies that the admission test that day proved it. Inquiring further, he asks if that training method could heal the master's body, but Mujin states that his methods alone won't be enough. He starts to explain that he'll need a few things, but the abbot slams his hand on the table. The temple leader declares that Shaolin will do whatever it takes to help the master. All Murim practitioners seek to strengthen their muscles and bones, and many factions have tried to find ways to master this process. Everything was tried, from basic acupuncture and tonics to mystical treatments and even breaking children's bones. Shaolin went through much trial and error treating Hyungguang, but no one succeeded, and the situation only worsened. Safely changing bones and muscles takes time and effort, but the admission test showed Mujin's methods were effective. And since the abbot saw these results with his own eyes, he was certain that this child could heal Master Hyungguang. Affirming his decision, the abbot says that if more of the great elixir is needed, he will make the sacrifice himself. He then declares that he will cut off his own arm for it, just as the great Hiega did before him. But that was far from what Mujin needed, and he asks if there are techniques in Shaolin that deal with Thunder Qi and Supreme Yang Qi. Confused, the abbot and Master Hyunsung look at each other at the young man's question. The temple leader confirms that such techniques exist, but asks why. Later, Mujin is invited into a room where the abbot and other masters await him. Present in the room is Hyungong, the head of the discipline hall and Beopgang's master, and brother Hyedam, a practitioner of the diamond indestructible body technique, is also there. Mujin comments that he heard the details on the way, and deduces that Hyungong must be Beopgang's master. Stepping forward, the two masters tell him to say what they need to do, as they will do anything to help Master Hyungwang. Then, Mujin rolls up his sleeve. He makes a specific request, for them to demonstrate the weakest divine thunder palm on his arm. Hyungong questions what he means by such a strange request. The young man explains he assumed they were planning a procedure to burn out a blockage in a meridian. He clarifies further, stating he doesn't need enough thunder chi to burn anything, but the smallest possible flow. Agreeing to try, Hyungong approaches to touch Mujin's arm. He then uses a weak version of the divine thunder palm and asks how it was. Questioning again, Hyungong asks if the intention is to electrocute Master Yongwang, while Mujin wonders if that was too much. Mujin firmly states that Master Yongwang won't be able to handle that much power, and that the force needs to be reduced by more than half. Hyungong asks if that's a challenge, and confidently states he can do it. Mujin tries to advise caution to treat the master safely, but is interrupted when Hyungong yells that he can do it. To properly treat Master Hyungwang, physical therapy equipment that doesn't exist in this world would be necessary, as he is older and weaker than Beopgang. Starting with a simple idea, Mujin watches Hyungong demonstrate an extremely weak version of the Divine Thunder Palm, which he approves as perfect. He was trying to recreate a specific piece of equipment found in any physical therapy clinic. In fact, he was recreating an electrical stimulation therapy machine. Hyungong asks if the intention is to make the thunder chi flow into the muscles, and Mujin confirms that's correct. He explains that sending a faint stream of thunder chi into the muscles stimulates them and improves blood flow, which helps them contract and grow. Hyungong then asks if simply letting the chi flow can do all that, and how long the treatment will take to show results. Hyedam states that he'll need to examine Master Hyungwang directly, but results should appear in about a month. Mujin then begins to explain what Master Hyedam's role will be. He says that just like Master Hyungong, he'll need to use the Supreme Yang Chi. Hyedam agrees to help if his techniques will be useful. Stepping forward, the master projects his palm with full force toward Mujin. The impact sends Mujin staggering back, and he warns him that's not the right way to do it. He instructs him not to extend his arm, explaining that the technique needs to be much weaker. Demonstrating, Mujin explains that when using the Supreme Yang Chi, he just needs to point his palm in the general direction, like the sun hanging in the sky. Instead of shooting the energy out, he tells him to let it flow gently from his palm. After the adjustment, Mujin checks the temperature and says it's now perfect. Explaining the analogy, he says that while Hyungong acts like an electrical stimulation therapy machine, Hyedam's role will be different. Acting as an infrared therapy machine, Hyedam will need to maintain the technique for about half an hour. The thermal energy will warm the skin, relieve muscle fatigue, and aid circulation, while also purifying muscles and joints. As the explanation continues, Hyedam interrupts and asks if this will really work. Mujin asks him to clarify what he means, and the master questions if these techniques can truly heal their master. He acknowledges Mujin's achievements, admitting his work with Beopgang and the Arhat Hall was impressive, but points out that the master's case is far more serious. So, Hyedam asks how they can trust a technique that only the young man knows. Understanding their skepticism, Mujin knows he is an expert in his own right, and all he wants is to help. A detail is revealed. As Ganghyok Choi, Mujin wasn't just a personal trainer, but a state-certified physical therapist. He delved even deeper, studying yoga, weight training, and all other forms of exercise, even learning about diet and nutrition. All this study was to recover from a serious injury, and the effort not only healed him, but changed his life. A memory reveals a young Gangyok studying for his certification. As an expert in training, nutrition, yoga, Pilates, and rehabilitation techniques, he was the right person for the job. If anyone in that era could properly diagnose and treat Hyungwang, it was Mujin. Back in the present, he decides not to hold back and admits he was shocked by how bad the master's condition was. Stating his position, he says he has studied treatment techniques and will do everything to help him improve, but he'll find another way if they don't like his methods. Reflecting, the masters think about how all known methods have failed, but this was a completely new approach. Considering the situation, they figure that if the boys' techniques can help the Grandmaster, there's still a sliver of hope. Hyedam won't dismiss this hope without a good reason. Confirming, Hyedam asks if it will take about a month, and Mujin says yes. So they decide to follow his instructions for 1 month, but the master warns that if there's no improvement, Mujin will be punished for crimes against the elders. Calmly, the young man says he understands. Smiling, Mujin says that this just means they need to improve the precision of their techniques and invites them to try again. Realizing the situation, Hyedam feels that maybe he's right and that his actions don't seem empty. After another session, the abbot dismisses Mujin so he can prepare for the next day. Then, the abbot asks what they thought, and Hyungong comments on how difficult it was to release a controlled, weak amount of energy. Speaking to Hyedam, he says this could be useful outside of treatment, as he never thought of using the techniques that way. The abbot explains that this approach to the Supreme Yang Qi is similar to its use in martial arts to control one's temperament. It's shown that masters of secret yin techniques are cold, while masters of yang and fire techniques have impetuous personalities. The Shaolin martial art uses yang qi to fight evil, but it only works when the fire and metal qis are in harmony. Starting from the idea of treatment, Mujin didn't intend to use the qi's explosive power, but to practice a weak, steady flow to create peace. Hyedam admits that upon reaching their level, power can get out of control, and he never realized he could use qi internally to temper it. He then retreats to his quarters to continue training, and Hyungong decides to do the same. The abbot suggests that once mastered, the technique could be taught to the disciples, as it would be a great help to those who practice fire qi. The next day, outside Hyungwang's pavilion, Beopjian greets the masters and asks what brings them there. They reply that it's about his master. Yanshin explains they've come because Mujin might be the one to finally heal the master, even if just a little. Lying in bed, Hyungwang is surprised to hear Mujin's name. Previously, Yanshin had already told Hyungwang and Beopjian everything that happened at the Arhat Hall and all that Mujin had accomplished. Then Mujin steps forward. He says he's going to examine him, and then they will begin the treatment. After a brief examination, he realizes the situation is even worse than he imagined. He asks how long the master has been bedridden, noticing there's almost no muscle left in his calves. Asking for his attention, Mujin requests that the master let him know if he feels any pain and begins to press on his back. As the master endures the procedure, he continues to apply force to the massage. He wonders to himself if everyone in Shaolin is a masochist, since first Beopgang and now the master won't admit to feeling pain. Then, Mujin announces that the full treatment will begin now. After warming the body with a damp towel, the treatment starts with acupressure to release tension. As a first step, he applies a 4-limb extension technique, moving the ankles and legs to loosen the stiff muscles. The master's body seemed like a fragile ancient vase that the slightest force could shatter. Extremely delicate control was needed to treat him, requiring intense concentration, but Mujin refused to show how difficult or tiring it was. After an hour of total concentration, the others are surprised by his dedication, and also by his unwavering focus fixed on the treatment. Then, a look of desperation begins to appear in Mujin's eyes without him realizing it. In the reflection of his eye, a grandfather appears, walking away hand in hand with a child. In the memory, the little boy calls out for his grandfather, and he promises that he'll find a cure, no matter what. Silently, Hyungwang lies in his bed. Watching Mujin, he begins to wonder what's troubling the young disciple so much. Looking closely, he notices the sadness etched on his face. Finally, Mujin lets out a sigh. Standing up, he announces that his part of today's treatment is done, confirming it's now the master's turn. Just like the previous night, the infrared and electrical stimulation therapies go smoothly. That night, after the treatment, Mujin moves his belongings from the Arhat Hall to Hyungwang's quarters. Settled into his new bed, he reflects on escaping the room full of sweaty, bald men, but he soon discovers he'll have to sleep in the same room with them to watch over Master Hyungwang. Despite hoping for a room of his own, he he decides he needs to get some sleep. He reflects on how bad the master's condition is, wondering if he suffered from pain and discomfort all these years. The situation reminds him of his grandfather and makes him realize how much he misses him. In a memory, a young Gangyuk massages his grandfather's leg. Asking if it feels better, he's told that it does, because he has a magic touch. Reassuringly, he tells his grandfather it doesn't hurt anymore and that he can relax now. With determination, he declares he'll study hard to find a way to free him from the pain. Smiling proudly, his grandfather encourages him to study hard. He says he can't wait to see how his grandson will do in the future. In another moment, Gangyuk supports his grandfather as he walks with an IV stand in the hospital. The scene shifts to incense burning slowly on a funeral altar. During the funeral, the young man is comforted by his grandmother as he cries. He laments that he never managed to do anything for his grandfather besides a few massages. Blaming himself, he starts calling himself useless. In another memory, his grandmother asks him which college he'll go to. Gangyuk replies that he's not interested in college and would rather do something else. His study materials were about physical training and therapy for the elderly. Then, he stops in front of an armed forces recruitment poster. Smiling, he decides he might even join the special forces. Dressed in his military uniform, Gangyuk tells his grandmother he finally made it and will have a stable job. Holding her hands, he promises to take care of her from now on, doing what his grandfather would have wanted. Alone at home, his grandmother asks over the phone if he's coming today, but is told there's training. In the middle of a mission in the jungle, he reaffirms to himself that he'll do what his grandfather would have wanted. Then, he raises his fist, determined to take care of her no matter what. With his face covered, he stays focused, thinking of his grandmother. A few days before his promotion, an officer approaches and calls him Lieutenant Choi. Gangyuk receives tragic news. Standing before his grandmother's memorial, he hears a colleague lament what happened, saying there's nothing they can do. Citing protocol, the man says they can only grant 3 days of leave, since she wasn't his biological mother. He's instructed to fulfill his duties and return quickly, as there's a top-secret mission ahead. Back on the mission, he pushes forward through the forest. The squad continues its climb up the steep slope. Suddenly, his foot slips, he loses his balance, and he falls. In his mind, the young man sits before the figures of his grandparents. He asks his grandfather if he feels better. Then, he asks if it's too late for another massage, and regrets not having done more for them. His grandfather's hand caresses him as he says, "You have a magic touch, you know. I can never really relax because of it." Tears stream down Mujin's face. Chuckling softly in his sleep, he remains there as the morning light fills the room. Entering the room, Beopgaeun finds Hyungwang watching Mujin, who's murmuring that he isn't crying. Approaching, Beopgaeun asks the master what they should do. Hyungwang keeps his gaze fixed on the sleeping boy. With his back turned, Mujin murmurs that he misses them. Telling him to leave them be, Hyungwang says this is a battle with his own heart. Understanding the situation, he realizes this might be why the young man is so determined to treat him. Wishing him well, he prays for Buddha to be with the boy. Smiling, he tells Mujin that if he wants, he can call him grandpa instead of master, without the need for formalities. Surprised, Mujin asks if he heard correctly as he rubs his eyes. Confused by the old man's words, he asks if he's feeling unwell. Finding the sudden kindness strange, he decides he should just do as he's told. Scratching his head, he awkwardly replies, "Yes, master. Grandpa." Immediately, the other masters scold him, asking how he dares refer to the venerable master that way, but he explains it was an order. Laughing, Hyungwang says it's fine to the annoyance of the other two, and confirms the young man has his permission. Continuing to laugh, he comments that it's been a long time since he's had this much fun. In silence, Mujin just watches the scene. Then, he asks if he can get back to the treatment, explaining that the request surprised him, but also made him feel more comfortable. One of the masters announces that the time has come to cut his hair, leaving Mujin stunned by the order. Explaining further, Hyunshin comments that while it's not as long as an outsider's, it's time to trim it. Hyedam adds that they've kept him busy, and they'll continue the master's treatment while he's gone. Then, Mujin ransacks a room full of documents, desperately searching for something that isn't there. Shouting in frustration, he complains that he can't find what he needs to save himself. He needs a historical precedent, anything he can use as an excuse to protect his hair, but he finds nothing. Annoyed, he complains about all the work it took to grow his hair out. In a memory, he asks a master why monks keep their hair short, and is told it symbolizes cutting ties with the secular world. The master explains that each cut serves as a reminder of the path to enlightenment, and Mujin asks if it's just a symbolic gesture. Confirming this, the master explains that Bodhidharma and the Buddha himself did the same, so they follow in their footsteps. He concludes by stating it's the first step to escaping the cycle of suffering, and an admirable tradition. Back in the present, Mujin dismisses the tradition as being too strict and continues his search. Breaking down, he complains that he never wanted to come to Shaolin and that he just fell asleep reading a novel and woke up here. Suddenly, he stops and wonders how the hell he ended up in this world. Trying to remember, he flashes through memories of the hospital, the gym, a live stream, and finally, reading a Shaolin novel before bed. Then, the memory of the hospital stands out in his mind. The doctor had diagnosed him with stress-induced baldness, warning him that he could go completely bald. Grabbing his head in despair, he reacts to the memory. Running frantically, he feels even more embarrassed. On top of the doctor's warning, now he has to shave it all off. He recalls the master's explanation about how cutting one's hair symbolizes severing ties with the secular world, but he reflects that cutting ties with the world doesn't necessarily have to involve his hair. Smiling, he realizes he needs to do something no one from this era would do. He concludes that he just needs to show he has cut ties with the modern world, and he runs out of the room. The next day, everything seems peaceful at the temple. Entering the room with a box in his hands, Beopjin announces the resumption of training. Hyunshin asks if the scissors and razor weren't delivered, and the disciple confirms they were. Then, turning to Mujin, the master asks why his hair hasn't been cut. Calmly, Mujin says he did cut his hair, much to the abbot's astonishment, who questions how that could possibly be considered a haircut. Recalling the teaching, he explains that cutting one's hair means severing ties with the outside world, and he felt this was a better way to do it. He argues that no one would look at this haircut and think he's still connected to the normal world. Furthermore, he explains that he shaved the symbol of the Buddha on the side to honor him in his own way. Proudly, he asks if the idea isn't admirable, despite it being just a modern haircut. Remaining impassive, Hyunshin and Beopjin are not impressed by his justification. Laughing, Youngwang finds the idea brilliant and states that meaning is more important than rules. At that moment, Hegol arrives at the door and asks for permission to enter. Upon entering, he immediately questions the strange haircut, reminding them he was sent to cut it. Mujin explains that to sever ties with the world and honor the Buddha, he decided this hairstyle was the best way, and that the elder approved as well. Reprimanding him, Hegel states that hair is a symbol of worldly desire, and that cutting it represents the path to enlightenment. With complete innocence, Mujin replies that's exactly why he cut it, but the master retorts that the remaining hair symbolizes attachment to the world. Arguing back, Mujin says that from what he understands, the Buddha didn't originally just cut his hair. He continues, stunning the masters, by saying that if the point is to show you face the pain of others to help them, then shouldn't you shave all the hair on your body? At this, Hyegol and Hyungong stare intently at their own beards. Smiling provocatively, Mujin asks if they shouldn't all shave their faces too. He then explains that the folding screens depict the founder, Bodhidharma, with only the top of his head shaved, keeping the rest. Looking at the founder's image, he concludes that what matters is cutting the connection to the outside world, not how it's done. Reflecting, the masters consider the point, remembering that Bodhidharma indeed only shaved the top of his head. Thinking it over, they realize Mujin did in fact shave part of his hair, add the Buddha's symbol, and that the haircut wouldn't be accepted in the outside world. Turning to Hyungong, Hyungwang asks for his opinion, questioning if he plans to shave his beard. Embarrassed, Hyungong gives in and says that if the hair doesn't grow any longer, they can allow it. Thanking them with a smile, Mujin receives permission. And since Hyungong would never shave his beard, the hairstyle is accepted. With Hyungwang's treatment finished, training begins early the next day. Approaching him, surrounded by other disciples, Beopgang confronts Mujin and yells, asking what the hell is with that hair. Mujin cheerfully replies that Master Hyungong authorized it, leaving Beopgang shocked. Suspicious, the Inquisitor asks if the Master really allowed it, thinking it's a miracle Mujin is still alive. Accepting the answer, Beopgang agrees and orders the training to begin. With the approval of the ever-strict Beopgang, the other disciples start getting ideas. Though on the path to enlightenment, they were still young, and many cared about what others thought or sought attention. For them, Mujin's unique hairstyle was enough to inspire a new trend. Approaching from behind, Mugung calls out to Mujin. Whispering, he says he also needs a haircut and asks how he got away with that. Mujin replies that he can tell him, but he doesn't think he'll have the same luck. Facing Hayetim, Mugung tries to argue that his hair symbolizes the will of the Buddha. He declares that as long as he can show he is on the path to enlightenment, there's no need to shave his head. In silence, the masters stare at him as he waits for an answer. Calmly, Hayetim calls for Beomwi, who responds immediately. Grabbed by Beomwi, Mugung protests the order. Hayetim firmly declares that he will shave his head with his own hands. Continuing the treatment, Mujin realized Hyungwang was in such bad shape that his entire body needed attention. But doing Doing it all at once was impossible, as it would overwhelm his body. So, he devised a plan, much like a workout routine, to break up the treatment and allow each body part to rest. One day would focus on the lower leg, another on the upper, one for the waist and hips, and another for the shoulders and arms, with Hyungwang and Hyedam following the same schedule. However, since Mujin wasn't officially the temple's doctor, but a Shaolin disciple, he said goodbye to the master, calling him grandpa, and said he'd see him later. Hyungwang wished him a good day, and Beopgeon assured him he would take care of the master. Still, Mujin reported to the Arhat Hall every day outside of his treatment hours. In the Arhat Hall master's quarters, it was announced that, thanks to the abbot, the requested additional funds had been granted. Mujin asked if this meant they could get all the equipment they needed. The master confirmed, explaining that the administrative hall had recognized his methods. In short, the Arhat Hall master informed him that all physical training would now follow Mujin's methods. Smiling, he noted that the methods once considered strange were finally being recognized. Realizing a key implication, Mujin understood what switching to his methods meant. He asked if this meant he would have to teach everyone in the Arhat Hall. He also asked if he'd need to teach them all personally, reassuring him the Arhat Hall master said he only needed to teach the second-level disciples how to use the equipment. He then handed him a stack of papers, and Mujin asked what it was all for. The master told him to write down any additional equipment he needed, along with detailed explanations. With a smile, Mujin couldn't wait. With the new equipment, he could implement more modern training. Questioning again, he asked if it was possible to get equipment for another location, and if he could order more. Finally, he clarified that he wanted to request equipment to help his grandfather, Master Hyungwang. Worried, the master feared the exercise would be too much for him, but Mujin explained that it was therapeutic equipment, which was completely different. Not understanding what he meant, he listened carefully to what Mujin had in mind for Hyungwang. The plan involved using Pilates. Although it's now seen as an exercise for women, it was originally created for the rehabilitation of injured veterans. In other words, it was perfect for Hyungwang. Agreeing, the master stated the administrative hall wouldn't deny the request and authorized him to proceed. As he started writing about the Pilates equipment, Mujin stopped midway. Then, he realized a problem and wondered if such equipment could even be made in this era. Most Pilates equipment, like foam rollers and resistance bands, is made from materials like rubber and plastic. Since none of that existed back then, Mujin planned substitutes using springs and metal frames wrapped in thick leather. Realizing the cost would be enormous, he tossed the list to the master and left, leaving him worried about the temple going bankrupt. 2 hours later, Mujin finally finished his meeting with Hyunsung. His friends greeted him and called him over to eat, commenting that he was a little late today. Then, Mugung asked what happened to his hair, noticing the drastic change in his look. As he began to explain, Mujin remembered that Mugung was now studying under Master Hidam. One of the young monks started crying, saying he had something in his eye, while another tried to cheer him up. Mujin asked Muyul how he'd been, and the boy replied that he was fine, but there was a problem. Explaining the situation, Muyul said that every time he trains, his master just keeps sighing loudly. He added that the master said he would visit him today, leaving Mujin confused as to why. Unsure of the reason, Muyul remained confused, while Hegel was shown elsewhere, sighing in frustration. Lamenting, the chief of external affairs blamed himself for the choice, as he was sure he had picked the right disciple. But Muyul was shown to be a simple boy, easily distracted by things like ants. Complaining, Hegel said that for every one thing he teaches, the boy forgets 2, and for every 2, he forgets 10. Worried, Hegel thought that at this rate, the 5 fists of Shaolin would be extinct in the next generation. Suddenly, Muyul spotted the master in the distance. With a beaming smile, he ran and called out to the master. Reflecting, Hegel acknowledged that the boy's smile was his most powerful trait, which was why he couldn't bring himself to scold him. So, he called out to Muyul and asked how he had learned martial arts during his time as a novice. Replying cheerfully, the young monk said that Mujin had helped him. Surprised, Hegel heard Muyul add that he had also helped Mugung and Mugyong. At that moment, the master remembered that Mujin was the disciple taken in by Hyungwang. Deciding to act, he concluded that he needed to learn the secret technique that had raised the level of that hopeless child. Inviting him along, Hegel told Muyul to come with him to meet Mujin, and the disciple gladly accepted. In the dining hall, the master approached and introduced himself to Mujin. The other young men were startled to see Master Hegel, and Mujin asked what brought him there. Explaining himself, he said he had something to discuss with both him and Master Hyungwang, asking Mujin to accompany him after the meal. Understanding the desire to see his grandfather, Mujin still wondered why the master also needed him as they headed to Hyungwang's quarters. Then Muyul ran in and greeted Master Hyungwang, who called him a cheerful child. Confused, Mujin wondered why Hegel was staring staring at him like that and if he'd done something wrong. Welcoming them, Hyungwang said that guests were always welcome, but asked what brought him there. Explaining the reason, the master said he came to ask Mujin a question. Leaning in, he whispered to Hyungwang about the immense difficulty in training the child, and mentioned he'd heard Mujin had helped him before. Being honest, he stated that even the most basic of the 5 fists of Shaolin seemed to completely elude the boy, and he needed Mujin's help. Suggesting a start, Hyungwang asked them to explain their choice and requested a demonstration from Mujin, leaving Hyegol surprised to hear him called Grandpa. Then, the master asked if he could spar with the child, and Mujin confirmed they had sparred many times as novices. Cheering him on, he told Muyul they were going to have some fun and called him outside. The young monk enthusiastically agreed. Questioning, Hyegol asked what he meant by have fun and if he trained while playing. Once outside, the master still didn't understand what having fun really meant. Mugung suggests they think of it as one of their usual games, and Muyul agrees. With his arms crossed, Master Hyegol admits he doesn't understand what they mean by playing. Silent for a moment, the 3 masters observe the situation. Then one of them comments that the meaning will soon become clear. Mugung turns to Muyul and asks if he's ready. Muyul confirms he is. Rushing across the courtyard, he leaps toward Muyul and shouts for them to play like old times. The story introduces the martial art known as the 5 Fists of Shaolin, a style invented by Bodhidharma. It was said to be modeled after the movements of 5 animals. While other Shaolin styles focus on restraint, this one is about releasing energy and free expression. Instead of following Buddha's path to enlightenment, the practitioner forges their own path. Because of this, the reputation of the 5 Fists has always bordered on being out of control. Hyegol is the style's only master and feels a heavy responsibility to keep it alive. Master Hyungwang remarks that Hyegol acted too hastily. His disciple questions the reason. Master Hyungwang explains that Muyul is perfectly suited for the 5 Fists of Shaolin. His movements are eccentric and unique, with a very creative expression. He concludes that Hyegol must be worried he chose the wrong heir, dooming the style's future. Interrupting Mugung's attack, Mujin says that's enough. Mugung asks if it was fun, and Muyul eagerly agrees as they bump fists. Master Hyungwang instructs Hyegol to take Mujin with him, stating that the disciple's problems should be shared among the masters. He also asks him to teach Mujin the 5 Fists, as he wants him to learn the same as Muyul. Surprised, Hyegol and Mugung react to the decision, while Muyul celebrates the idea of training together. Hyegol argues that the 5 Fists are the opposite of other Shaolin styles, but the master assures him there's no need to worry. Turning to Mujin, he tells him not to forget one thing. He explains that what you can see doesn't matter, but rather the true meaning behind it all. Mujin takes in those words. As Master Hyungwang and his disciple leave, Hyegol bows and promises to learn as much as he can. The next day, Mujin begins his training in the 5 Fists of Shaolin. He finds himself back at the training grounds. Muyul comments that it's the first time they've trained alone since he got hurt, and Mugung agrees. Watching the two, Hyegol wonders why Master Hyungwang made him train Mujin, questioning if he now has 2 problems instead of 1. Knowing how the master must feel, Mugung understands his confusion and frustration at suddenly getting a second student. But he remembers that his grandfather was a great master and surely had a reason for his decision. Regardless, Hyegol announces he will teach them both, and Mujin decides he might as well learn what he can. Then, the master begins the lesson on Bodhidharma's 5 Fists, asking Mujin to watch carefully and learn. He explains they will start with the simplest and easiest, the Crane Fist. Calling for Beophion, Hyegol asks him to come forward for a demonstration. Introducing himself as Muyul's master, Beophion tells Mujin to watch closely. He explains that the first step, as always, begins with chi breathing. Focusing for a moment, Beophion prepares himself. He begins, performing a sequence of fluid and graceful movements. His hands trace an arc in the air, and the demonstration ends in a final pose. Impressed, Muyul watches, while Mujin realizes this is completely different from other Shaolin styles. Beophion explains that the style is modeled after a crane, causing the entire body to move fluidly. Watching, Mugung sees Muyul contorting in a way he hasn't seen in a long time. Slapping his own forehead, Hyegol reacts, and Mugung asks what they can do. Approaching, Mujin notices that Muyul has all the flexibility and body control needed for the 5 Fists. He asks what's wrong, and Muyul replies that the crane fist form feels strange. Explaining further, Muyul says that moving that way is clumsy, and stopping is perhaps even stranger. Surprised, Mujin realizes he knows the forms, but doesn't understand why he can't connect them. Then, Hyegol says that's why he sought him out, as Muyul learned the technique from him when he was still a novice. As Muyul continues to move erratically, Ironically, Mujin admits he doesn't have an easy solution for this. He starts to wonder why his grandfather sent him there, certain there must be a reason. In a memory, Master Yongwang tells Mujin that he created his own martial arts style by combining basic techniques. Mujin thanks the master for the demonstration. The master warns him that if he wants to increase his power, his body will eventually reach a point where it can no longer bear it. Mujin's martial arts style was based on layering multiple basic techniques instead of learning more advanced ones. Since the force of each technique was amplified, he worked to strengthen his body to withstand these forces. But, according to Hyungwang, at some point, the body will no longer be able to handle so much power, and his methods will stop working. Agreeing, Mujin admits his grandfather is right, and that there must be something better than just relying on that idea. Watching him for a moment, the master suggests he try learning the Diamond Fist, piquing Mujin's curiosity. He explains that, like the Little Flood Fist, the Diamond Fist is based on the Diamond Sutra, which holds keys to power control. But as the master recites the third verse, Mujin wonders what it's all about. The disciple looks up at the master, who seems to agree with his unspoken question. Reinforcing his point, Hyungwang stresses the importance of discovering the true meaning behind each technique, as what you can see isn't what matters. Remembering this, Mujin recalls that he had said before that the true meaning is the most important thing. He begins to wonder what the true meaning of the crane fist might be. He realizes that the crane's movement is exactly what the form follows. The moment he understands the true meaning of the crane fist, Mujin believes he has finally gotten it. Turning to Muyul, Mujin asks if he's ever seen a crane. Moving unsteadily, Muyul replies that he never has. As he asks if a crane is food, the narration explains that the style was designed for every movement to flow naturally, and it didn't make sense that someone so flexible would have such a hard time learning. Questioning this, Beofian asks if Mujin is saying the movement was too clumsy and difficult for Muyul to follow. Mujin quickly denies it, explaining that's not what he meant. He clarifies that the problem is that Muyul has never seen a crane, so he was just trying to imitate him. Addressing Beofian, Mujin says the problem isn't in the movement, and asks him to reflect on it. While it's said that animal movements are natural, that's only true for that specific animal's body. What we do is imitate those movements with human bodies. Beofian confirms this is correct, as they learn the main forms and movements through training. But Mujin argues that Muyul just needs the basic framework to then discover his own movements. Questioning the idea, Beofian listens as Mujin explains that his friend can't learn forms that imitate a crane, but what he can do is imitate the crane itself, leaving the others thoughtful. Finally understanding, Hegel realizes why Master Yongwang sent the boy to him. Mujin wonders why he's been so fixated on forms and movements, since he doesn't follow traditional paths. Reflecting, he realizes he was entrusted with the freest of Shaolin's martial arts, the 5 fists. He asks himself when he lost sight of the style's true spirit, getting stuck on a limited idea of what Bodhidharma taught. Agreeing, Hegel admits he's right and decides they need to show Muyul what a crane is. Beofian suggests they go find one, since they often gather nearby. The next day, the question of how they would manage to bring a crane to the temple still lingered. Arriving at the training grounds, Mujin apologizes for being late due to his grandfather's treatment. Stopping at the entrance of the empty courtyard, Mujin calls for Master Hegel. Getting no answer, he looks around and calls for Beofian and Muyul, wondering where everyone is. Walking through the courtyard, he questions if there was no training for some reason that day. Then, Mujin asks Muyul if he can guess what that is, and the boy asks what he's talking about. Peeking around a corner, he observes the scene as Muyul expresses his awe. Before them, in a small pond in the courtyard, is a crane. Hegel and the others admire the bird, exclaiming how incredible cranes are. That bird's movement was the original inspiration for the creation of the fighting style. Together they demonstrate the crane fist, one of the 5 fists of Shaolin. Arriving at the courtyard, Mujin asks if they're going to train, and Muyul announces his arrival. Turning around, the master and Beofian whisper his name, leaving him confused. Then, they both shout Mujin's name with great intensity. Excited, Muyul tells him to look, saying it's amazing. Joining them, Mujin takes part in the crane fist demonstration for Muyul, who watches in wonder. In a memory, the masters demonstrate the crane fist alongside the bird's movements so Muyul can learn every detail. Beofian asks if Muyul is understanding, but the boy remains crouched, watching the crane in silence. Muyul's crane fist turns out to be very different from Hegel's and Beofian's. After observing the bird's real movements, he interprets them to fit his own body. With his natural flexibility and a unique connection to animals, he moves in sync with the crane. It was as if he had escaped human movement and found true harmony with the animal. The movement embodied the very essence of the crane. Shocked, Beofian watches the scene, while Mujin and Hegel look on in silence. Because they were completely new, the movement still lacked refinement and intent, but this is easily corrected by the master's touch, as he adjusts an arm and a leg. He then explains that the greatest benefit of the 5 fists is that all forms connect freely, which will help him with his own crane fist. And he guarantees that although it's a bit different from the original form, the freedom of the 5 fists will never lead him astray. Mujin asks if he thinks he'll be able to learn, and Muyul confirms he can. He then ties the sash of his own clothes. Getting their attention, he addresses Biofion and Master Hegol. He announces that his work there is done, and confirms he will not be back the next day. Hegol comments that it seems he found what he was looking for, and is ready to return to his own master. Bowing, Mujin thanks the master for everything he taught him. The master then asks Muyul to accompany Mujin, and the boy readily agrees. As they walk away, Biofion asks if it isn't too soon to send him off, but Hegel reassures him. He explains that the boy was never there to learn the crane fist. Realizing the situation, Mujin understands there was nothing left to train there, because what he needed to learn wasn't the crane fist. He had already created his own style as a novice, but hit a wall when trying to safely master and incorporate new methods. By watching Hegel and Muyul adjust the crane fist, he understood what he needed to do. If he started with the small flood fist and inserted movements from the diamond fist, he could increase its power with less impact on his body. It was exactly as his grandfather had said. He wanted Mujin to find the true nature of his own style. He didn't need to master the crane fist, just understand its main movements to create a true hybrid style. He then starts to wonder if there are other fists, like a dragon's, and if they could find one, but he concludes that it would be up to Muyul's masters to figure that out, and it wasn't his problem. Hegel announces he's retiring for the day, and asks Biofion to dismiss Muyul when he arrives. The most surprising thing dawns on him at that moment, as he realizes something important. All of this had been the result of Hyungwang's plan. Hegel wonders if the master planned everything, and if Mujin had already understood the lesson. That was truly admirable. A month into the treatment, Mujin notices his grandfather no longer feels pain with small movements, though a full recovery is still a long way off. And there's a major obstacle in the way, but it doesn't matter. There's no other choice. At this point, he decides it's time to get serious. This is his only hope. As they walk, Abbot Hyeonchin and Master Hyedam wonder if Master Hyungwang will ever recover, but they notice he at least seems more lively. Recalling the past, Hyedam mentions that the abbot threatened to punish Mujin if the treatment failed, but he hears the threat was only meant to make him take the situation seriously. The abbot then says that they should hurry, regardless. In Hyungwang's quarters, Mujin prepares to begin the treatment. As the door opens, the masters enter and ask what was so serious that he had to call them. Turning to the abbot, he asks for a moment and explains that he's almost done with his grandfather's physical therapy. Watching the scene, the abbot wears a surprised expression. Hyungwang asks if today is for his hips since yesterday was his legs, and Mujin confirms. Rushing toward them, the abbot questions if Master Hyungwang should be moving like that. Calmly, Hyungwang replies that it's gotten much easier, and that was just a light stretch. The answer leaves the abbot stunned. For Master Hyungwang, that was by no means an ordinary movement. Before, he could barely breathe, couldn't move beyond his own body, and felt intense pain even when being carried. Outside the quarters, Hidam asks if the treatment is working. Yanshin admits he never imagined he'd see the master moving on his own. The abbot recalls Mujin saying that 1 month would be enough and confirms the effects are already visible. Hidam confesses he doubted the techniques but is surprised by their effectiveness. Hyunchin informs him that he asked Mujin to come to them after the treatment so they can question him personally. Mujin knew the older monks had immense faith in him, but he wondered if that would be enough. He understood the real test was about to begin. He needed to get his grandfather to walk on his own. Until now, he had focused on rehabilitation and physical therapy exercises to develop Hyungwang's core muscles. He helped him stand and practice walking. Much like a patient in a modern rehabilitation facility, Hyungwang was relearning how to walk. His joints and tendons had recovered somewhat, but decades had passed with him only moving with the help of others. In other words, his muscles had severely atrophied. It was time to strengthen them to support his joints, and Mujin knew this was the only way. Opening the door, he asks for permission to enter, and says he has something to discuss about his grandfather's treatment. One of the masters asks if there's a problem, since Hyungwang was even moving on his own. Mujin explains that it's going well for now, but there's a problem with the next step. The master asks him to elaborate. He details that although there's recovery, the cartilage is deteriorated, which is normally solved by strengthening the muscles. But in his grandfather's weakened state, The exercises needed to build muscle would put excessive pressure on his joints and worsen the situation. One of the masters asks if he's raising the issue because he already has a solution in mind. Another master comments that the treatment has been successful so far, and his achievements have been admirable. They encourage him to share any method he knows, assuring him they will listen with an open mind. Preparing himself, Mujin begins to explain what his grandfather truly needs. He states clearly that the solution is to eat meat, leaving the masters in silence. The word meat echoes in the room as the narration explains that its necessity for building muscle is a controversial topic. Many vegetarian kinesiologists insist a meat-free diet is sufficient, and as an expert, Gangyak had also studied the subject. While both proteins are made of amino acids, the central issue is how the body absorbs them. At his advanced age, Hyungwang's digestive system can't handle large volumes of food, requiring protein sources from meat. But this was the legendary Shaolin order, and the simple act of eating meat was unthinkable. Rising in protest, they shout that eating meat in Shaolin is sacrilege and will never happen. Putting his hands on his head, Mujin realizes the situation is worse than he imagined. The abbot approaches and asks why someone would need to eat meat to build muscle, since Mujin himself managed without it. Recalling his past, Mujin remembers eating meat as a child and states that his situation is different. He explains further that while beans and mushrooms can replace meat, they are still just substitutes. He then declares that, unlike him and Biopgang, his grandfather doesn't have the luxury of youth to recover. He asks if the prohibition on eating meat isn't about overcoming desire, admitting that's how he managed to stop. But he points out that this practice only has meaning for those who can endure it, not when Buddhist law demands something that leads to death. Remembering his grandfather, he despairs at the thought of losing him. Shouting, he declares he won't let it happen again, and questions if that doesn't violate the Buddhist law against killing. One of the master's heads begins to throb with fury. Then Hyungong accuses him of dishonoring Master Hyungwang and daring to argue Shaolin law with him. Intervening, Abbot Hyunqian places a hand on his shoulder and tells him to calm down. Reacting to the touch, Hyungong tries to resist. With just a touch on the shoulder, Hyunqian disperses all of his inner force. Turning, the abbot faces the other master, who agrees that Mujin makes a good point. He asks if eating meat is truly the only way for the master to get better, and why that would be the only path. Realizing the situation, Mujin understands he can't use modern terms. They know nothing about the science of protein and muscle recovery. Deciding to improvise, he begins to explain that reincarnation doesn't just mean leaving the world upon death. He argues that everything in the world lives in cycles, and to nourish the human body, a certain amount of meat must be consumed. Nature dictates that all life ends and is reborn, and part of that is humans eating meat and plants. He asks if it's wrong to eat something already dead to keep living, even if killing for pleasure is wrong. He explains further that in nature's eyes, humans are just another type of animal, which is why consuming animal flesh makes one's own flesh grow. The abbot listens to the entire speech in silence. Then, he lets out a sigh. Stating his position, he says that while the words have merit, they can't break 1,000 years of Shaolin law without clear evidence. When Mujin tries to protest, he is interrupted by a gesture from the abbot. He continues, saying this doesn't mean they can simply ignore the master who protected the order. Recalling the past, the abbot remembers one of the master's battles. Turning to Hyungong, he asks, in the name of the Jade Buddha's palm, that he review one of the Shaolin laws. The decision surprises the other masters, but Hyunkeon confirms what they were all thinking. Proposing a change, he suggests adding an exception to the Shaolin law, allowing the sick to eat meat for treatment purposes. The proposal leaves the other masters completely shocked. Celebrating silently, Mujin realizes he can now save his grandfather. Declaring the decision, Hyunshin states this will allow them to uphold Shaolin's law by punishing the master for eating meat. Mujin asks what the punishment will be, and offers to take it in his place. The abbot then informs him that he must undergo a month of meditation, asking if he's ready to endure it 4 times in a row. In a low voice, he questions what a month of meditation would even entail, but he gladly accepts the punishment, stating that it's nothing. Around them, the masters question the abbot's decision, who acknowledges that everything is unexpected. The next day, in Hyungwang's quarters, he is informed about what was discussed in the meeting. The master then tells Hyunqian that for the sake of Shaolin's next generation, they must place their trust in Mujin. Reflecting, Hyunqian admits that upholding tradition has kept Shaolin bound by its customs for 1,000 years. Recounting the past, he says he took the abbot's position because of Hyungwang's injuries, and, due to his own shortcomings, he merely clung to tradition. Taking responsibility, Yeoncheon blames himself for Shaolin's decline from its former glory. Responding, Hyungwang says that change isn't always for the better, and he knows this well. Concluding, the abbot states that this was why he chose Moojin, hoping the boy will bring positive change. Affirming his decision, Hyungwang says he wishes to place his trust in Moojin once more. Then, Abbot Hyuncheon allows him to enter the room. When Moojin enters carrying the meal, Hyungwang immediately understands what it is. The food contained meat. The master recognizes the rice porridge, something he hadn't eaten in many decades. With no other choice, Hyungwang accepts. Remembering the determination in Hyuncheon's eyes and what Moojin faced to convince the elders, he proceeds. And so, for the first time since taking the Shaolin Oath, the master eats meat. The following week, Moojin teaches Byopjian how to take over the master's treatment. Once he is able to follow the treatment, Hyungwang begins to consume small portions of meat. Whether due to the treatment or the diet, the master seems to be on the road to recovery. The time then comes for Moojin to begin his meditation in the cave. Walking through the forest, he thinks he never imagined coming back here, but he has to do what must be done. As he approaches the cave, he remembers when he was dragged there as a novice. His original plan was to meditate a little, hunt and eat meat, and live in survival mode for a while. But now, with Hyuncheon present, he invites him into the cave. Remembering the meeting, Moojin recalls when the abbot said he knew the situation was unexpected. Declaring his decision, Hyuncheon says he will accept the same punishment as Moojin. Surprised, the young man asks if he plans to join the meditation, and the abbot confirms. Realizing the situation, he understands this is how the law was changed, and that he is now in a complicated position. As soon as they sit, Hyuncheon begins to recite Buddhist scriptures, and Moojin feels his body unable to move. As the abbot continues his recitation, the young man realizes he seems to be mixing all the sutras together. In silence, Moojin just listens. Suddenly, he realizes something is wrong, as the abbot shouldn't be chanting sutras. Recalling his studies, he understands that Hyuncheon is mixing the sutras on purpose. Passages from different texts are recited in an unusual order. While meditating, Moojin starts to look for a pattern in the sequence. Then he realizes they all belong to essential texts he has studied and are linked to martial arts techniques. With this in mind, he starts paying closer attention to the chants, associating each passage with a technique. And so, he begins a visualization training. In his mind, he visualizes the first form as a straight punch and the sixth as a kick, but feels something in the sequence isn't right. For 30 minutes, he continues to visualize the training, connecting sutras and techniques. Then, he starts to get restless, wanting to execute the forms he sees in his mind, as just visualizing isn't enough. But he remembers he can't stand up in front of the abbot. Suddenly, Hyuncheon begins to chant the sutras, leaving the young man confused. Questioning himself, he tries to understand if this is intentional and what the master expects him to do. Deciding to take a risk, he prepares to stand up and practice the movements. Moojin glances at Hyuncheon and sees the abbot remains in meditation. With no reaction at all, this confirms what needs to be done. Starting the movement, he throws a straight punch, the first form of the chain link fist. Then, he executes the 21st form from the diamond fist texts, and he finishes the combination with the autumn wind leg. With the abbot providing the rhythm, it becomes easy to synchronize the movements, but he notices the master repeating the same passage and wonders if he made a mistake. Hyuncheon coughs, and Moojin understands that mistakes would be indicated by coughs and changes in tone of voice, and the chants would become lower and calmer when a movement was approved. The training taught how to combine the best techniques contained in each sutra. The order and speed of the strikes were determined by the rhythm of the abbot's chants, and the secret training continued through the night. At that moment, Moojin begins to wonder why he was being trained this way. The abbot then reflects that they have already taken too much of Moojin's time with the master's treatment. He thinks it would be wrong to take another month on top of that, so he decides to make up for all the training Moojin has missed. A monk delivers the meditation rations and water, telling them to eat. Then, Hyuncheon and Moojin enter the cave. Sitting down, Moojin realizes he was almost caught training and hadn't sensed the person's arrival. Understanding the situation, he figures the abbot's cough was a warning, permitting his training, but he can no longer stay still and feels the need to leave. Watching him go, Hyuncheon thinks the cave is too cramped for proper training. However, Moojin isn't leaving to train, but to get some protein, asking a rabbit to go fetch its parents. Meanwhile, Byopjian notices the master has changed remarkably. Thanks to a diet of meat and rehabilitation therapy, Hyungwang had visibly improved. His once weak and thin frame now showed small signs of muscle development, and with this improvement, he could now move without Byopjian's help. Notified that the time has come, another disciple appears, and Byopjian leaves to prepare lunch. Watching him go, Hyungwang remains silent. Reflecting, he realizes his body's change had been hindered by his own stubbornness. Then, he remembers how the abbot blamed himself for rigidly following tradition. Though he disagreed before, he now understands why the abbot blamed himself so much. Because he realizes he would not have acted any differently in his place. Admitting it to himself, he acknowledges that he too was foolish. Recalling the past, he remembers saying that meaning is more important than rules. But, unable to walk, he couldn't see what has now become clear as he stands on his own feet. He questions why they were so bound by ascetic practice, just because it was Shaolin tradition. Remembering the past, he recalls the day the demonic sect invaded, and he lost his martial arts. At that moment, everyone was worried, but the young Hyungwang insisted he was fine. In truth, he was consumed by agony. At his peak, he believed he understood the 5 natures, the martial arts, and the scriptures. But as he weakened, he couldn't accept those lessons, for his chi center had been destroyed. Now, however, it has become possible again, thanks to someone else's stubbornness. Reflecting in silence, Hyungwang thinks that even if the temple disappears one day, it will remain in his heart. Then he sits in meditation under the rain, reciting a mantra of awakening. The one who reached the 5 natures now joins the one who has become enlightened. Awakening to the highest level, he becomes completely free. Reflecting, the master thinks of the immensity of chi in the world and the limitations of the human body to contain it. Walking down a temple corridor, Hyungwang suddenly stops upon feeling a powerful chi. Moving at high speed, he crosses the courtyard. Recognizing the chi as Hyungwang's, he notices a different, unknown flow. Gazing up towards the cliff, he wonders what could have happened. Meanwhile, Hegul and other monks arrive in the courtyard. Abbot Hyuncheon looks up, considering the situation impossible. Watching, Hyungwang sees the master's ki explode and wonders if he has reached enlightenment and nirvana. On the cliff, Hyungwang continues his meditation. An immense energy rises towards the sky, visible to the entire temple. Noticing the rain has stopped, the monks question the energy's origin, but they recognize the key. Even those less skilled at sensing it understand that this energy belongs to Master Hyungwang. A benevolent and warm energy, transcending anything they had ever known, envelops the monks in the courtyard. Joining their hands in reverence, they all bow. Understanding what has happened, they realize Hyungwang has reached nirvana and recite a mantra in unison. Raising his voice, Hyungwang asks if his master has finally reached enlightenment. Floating in the air, Hyungwang remains completely enveloped by the energy. Replying, he says that he is merely allowing in his heart what he already knew in his mind. Surprised, Hyungwang reacts to the answer. Questioning, he asks why, having reached nirvana, he has not yet passed into Buddhahood. Explaining, Hyungwang says he has unfinished business, and that his nirvana was achieved thanks to Mujin. Walking towards his disciples, he asks where Mujin is. A monk informs him that he has been practicing meditation with the abbot for 18 days. Interrupting, Abbot Hyuncheon states that this isn't true. The order causes an immediate reaction among the monks and Hyungwang. Running, a messenger heads to the cave, finding the situation unpleasant. Arriving at the location, he informs the abbot and Mujin that their meditation is over and they must return. Recalling the punishment, Hyuncheon says there are still 10 days left. The monk insists, stating he received orders to bring them back. The abbot questions who would have the authority to end a formal punishment. Revealing the source, he says the order came from Master Hyungwang. Alarmed, Mujin asks why the Grandmaster would order an end to the meditation and if something has happened to his grandfather. Hyungwang questions what the master is doing, and the reply comes telling him not to shout. He then asks about the food, and Hyungwang explains he heard it's good for the body. He mentions that the rules have changed thanks to the abbot, and encourages him to try it, but the master questions if someone who has already reached nirvana still needs to worry about such things. As they walk down the hall, Hyungwang asks if there's a problem with what he's eating. He continues, questioning if that's why Hyungwang forced Mujin into the cave just to save him. A disciple announces the arrival of Mujin and the abbot, and Hyungwang invites them in. Commenting quietly, Mujin tells the abbot he feared the worst after being summoned so suddenly, but that his worry was unnecessary. The young man decides to enter, stepping forward as the abbot wonders what the problem could be. As they get closer, Both Mujin and the abbot catch a scent coming from inside the room. Hyunggwang reveals the scene, a grand banquet. He tells Hyunggwang he can't achieve Buddhahood with so much left to experience. Hyunggwang states his position, affirming he will say no more. The master thanks him for understanding before calling for Mujin. Standing in the doorway, Mujin is utterly shocked by the scene in front of him. Confused, he wonders what's going on, while Hyunggwang asks if it isn't obvious. Smiling, he declares that he's taking care of his own body. Mujin turns to Hyunggwang, looking for an explanation, and hears the master state that he hasn't eaten anything, as Hyunggwang requested it. Flexing his arm, Hyunggwang says that for a long time he could barely move, but now, thanks to the meat, he's much better. He firmly declares that they couldn't lock Mujin in a cave, because those who do the right thing cannot be considered guilty. Hyunggwang dismisses him, telling Mujin to go train and asking the abbot to stay. The young man seizes the chance to leave, leaving Hyunchian behind. After hearing what happened, Mujin complains that his grandfather reached nirvana only to become like this because of his love for meat. But there was also good news. The equipment he had requested from the grandmaster had finally arrived. Byopjian comments that now he can train as much as he wants. Arriving on the scene, Mujin finds a room full of monks training with weightlifting equipment. Byopjian explains that they don't know how to use some of the machines and asks him to teach the others. Remembering the past, Mujin realizes the place isn't on the same level as his old gym, but the smell of sweat and iron makes him feel like he's in a true temple dedicated to the body. Nearby, two monks stare at a piece of equipment, wondering how to use it, and decide to wait for Mujin. When he arrives, Mujin asks Mugung and Muyul where Mugyong is. Mugung replies that he must be somewhere else, as other monks approach, asking if he escaped from prison. A monk points to a piece of equipment and asks about it. Mujin brings a hand to his head, exclaiming that now this is a real piece of equipment. Correcting himself, he explains that the object is a rubber wheel. He then asks the others if they want to learn how to use it, or if they're just going to stand around and watch. He grabs the wheel, noticing the spokes are made of wood and iron, covered in melted natural rubber. Flipping the tire, he explains that the exercise should be repeated across the entire training ground. He tells them the tire weighs about 250 gun, and that the exercise works the whole body, teaching how to distribute force. He challenges Mugung to try, and the young man accepts. As Mugung begins to lift the tire, Mujin warns him that using his internal energy would be cheating. Just then, Muyul approaches, saying he also has a question. He explains that he didn't know what a piece of equipment was for, so he invented his own exercise and asks if he's doing it right. Mujin watches as Muyul easily leaps over a bar 3 meters high. He recognizes that Muyul's flexibility makes him the true heir to the Shaolin's 5 fists. Observing his movements, Mujin compares him to a monkey and wonders if there is a 6th fist, the monkey fist. Hanging upside down, Muyul asks if he's doing the exercise correctly, and Mujin gives him a thumbs up. Other pieces of equipment were also scattered around the training yard. Looking at it all, Mujin thinks the place is perfect. He reflects that focusing only on size and bodybuilding would interfere with his martial arts. He needs to maintain his flexibility. Continuing his career as a trainer at the Shaolin Temple, Mujin remains determined to become a master as quickly as possible. But his focus wasn't solely on his career. He informs his grandfather that he will personally handle his treatment using new tools. He then presents what is known as a leather post. The object was a solid cylinder, known in modern times as a foam roller. Mujin explains that it can be used on various parts of the body and invites his grandfather to try it. As Hyunggwang reacts to using the roller, he's told to be careful and go slow. Mujin clarifies that his muscles are stiff and it will hurt at first, but they will relax over time. At that moment, Hyunggwang decides that everyone should use this tool to free themselves from the obsession of learning through suffering. Changing the subject, his grandfather asks how Mujin's training is going. Observing closely, the master notices that qi flows more freely through his grandson's body since he last saw him. Satisfied, Mujin says all the hard training must be paying off. Hyunggwang remains silent for a moment, continuing to watch. Turning, he grabs something hidden and says he knew this would happen. He hands Mujin a map and a message, and the young man asks who the note is for. Hyunggwang asks if he remembers learning the 5 fists, and Mujin confirms that he learned how to connect and combine the movements. His grandfather then hands him the paper, saying the next place will also be of great help, which makes the young man suspicious. He says only that Mujin will understand when he gets there. Elsewhere, a man drinks from a gourd. Fallen on the ground, a disciple complains that at this pace they couldn't even catch a fly and begs them to slow down. His master, Hyegwan, refuses, stating that they would all become lazy that way. The chief of the Death Demon Brigade firmly orders them to hurry, and Mujin's name is called. Thanks to all his training, Mujin had achieved a reliable level of inner strength. With a message from Master Yonggwang in hand, he headed for the Death Demon Brigade, but he felt a bit nervous, since his training would be with Haegwan, the brigade's chief. Finally arriving, he faced the immense temple gates. Inside, Haegwan was demanding the monks attack with more spirit and stop cowering. Threatening them, he said he would feed them to the wolves. The group of disciples charged at him all at once. Haegwan simply tossed a bottle into the air and struck a monk's face with his staff. Then, he hit 2 other apprentices. One of the monks called out his predictable moves as Haegwan leaped into the air, but the tip of the staff struck another disciple's head. Seeing an opening, one of the men tried to attack his back. Turning, Haegwan blocked the blow with his hand. Spinning immediately after, he hit 2 monks at the same time with his staff. Surprised, one of the disciples realized the attack had been deflected. On the defensive, Haegwan dealt with attacks from multiple staves at once. Laughing at the situation, he showed complete control, and all the disciples were hit simultaneously. Catching the bottle he'd thrown, he held it casually. With everyone on the ground, he called the monks useless. But Mugyeong got up and prepared an attack called the 18 Hands of Dharma. Charging forward, he unleashed a swift blow. Leaping over him, Haegwan asked if he saw how easy it was to dodge, and he struck him with a heavy blow to the back. With the young man down, he stated that Mugyeong failed to control his bloodlust, but ended up saving everyone. Approaching, a disciple announced that Mujin had arrived with a message for the master. Presenting himself formally, Mujin introduced himself as a 3rd-generation disciple before Master Haegwan. Looking at him, Haegwan wore a confused expression. Then he started to laugh and pointed at the young man's hair. Taking the message, he asked if Hyungong from the Hall of Discipline had allowed that. Reading its contents, he commented that the note asked him to train Mujin, who was supposed to be serving a month of meditation. Haegwan asked if the boy knew what was written, and the reply was that he hadn't read it. He then explained that the message authorized him to teach in his own way. Pointing to the fallen men, Mujin asked if that was what he was talking about, and Haegwan confirmed. The master simply declared that there's no better training than a real fight. He explained that the Death Demon Brigade faces true, irredeemable evil. The brigade exists to fight the worst members of the demonic cult. He warned that anyone who doesn't fight with their all will be easily defeated, and said he wouldn't go easy on Mujin. Mujin began to say he would submit, but was cut off as a staff grazed past his face. Leaping toward him, Haegwan yelled that there was no reason to wait and called him to fight. The young man asked if the fight was starting now, and the new master shot back, asking if the enemy usually waits. Sliding to the side, Mujin prepared a counterattack and said he would do his best. Mujin charged forward, but Haegwan stated that his strength and speed were still not enough. Noticing something, he saw the young man had used the iron shirt technique. In that instant, Mujin had used the technique to protect his face. Haegwan praised the innovative way he combined the movements of the diamond fist. Even while being hit by kicks and punches, he admitted the connection between the moves wasn't bad. But throwing sand in his face, he pointed out that the transition between his moves wasn't smooth at all. Mujin accused him of cheating, but Haegwan retorted that the enemy will do anything to win. Attacking again, the master said he needed to stoop to their level instead of complaining about tricks. Noticing it again, he observed the boy's haircut, impressed that Hyungong had allowed it. As he watched the young man's persistence, Haegwan decided he would make Mugyeong try the hairstyle when his hair grew out. Whenever Mujin left an opening, Haegwan attacked him with every dirty trick, but the boy didn't complain. Haegwan commented that he was fun to fight, but warned that women don't like persistence. Even exhausted, Mujin replied that the master must be very popular. Announcing a break, the master finally stopped the fight, and Mujin collapsed to the ground. Lying down, Mujin asked Mugyeong if he was going to keep pretending to be knocked out, since he heard him greet him earlier. Getting up, Mugyeong explained he was just waiting for the master to lower his guard to attack. On the ground, Mujin realized the beating had made his weaknesses clearer. Turning to Mugyeong, he proposed they come up with a plan to play dirty too. As a disciple announced the arrival of the administrative hall chief, Mujin said he had a great idea. Annoyed, Haegwan said they only need funds for drinks and water for the kids. The disciple informed him that the chief was accompanied, and Mujin declared he would take down that drunk no matter what. Explaining the plan, he told Mugyeong that no matter how strong the master is, he'll leave an opening at some point. With a secret plan in mind, Mujin told his companion to strike the master as soon as he charged forward. Mugyeong doubts the secret plan will work on that monster, but Mujin guarantees it will. He explains that the plan will work as long as their target still feels a shred of gratitude. Haegwan complains to his disciple about all the fuss a single visitor is causing. Suddenly, a voice startles the master, asking if his arrival is a problem. As he approaches, the person says he surely can't be that unwelcome. The newcomer reveals himself to be Master Hyungwang. He says he'd be hurt if Haegwan had forgotten him. Shocked, Hyegwan freezes, unable to react to his master's presence. He can hardly believe Hyungwang is even able to stand. Overcome with emotion, the brigade master desperately runs toward him. A monk whispers that he's never seen the master act this way, not even in front of the abbot. Mujin agrees, saying that Brute would never show respect for anyone. But seeing Hyegwan rush forward, he tells Mugyong it's time for their secret plan. With a knowing smile, Mujin proves he knows Hyegwan better than anyone. He recalls that despite his intimidating appearance, Hyegwan wasn't actually that rude. In fact, he was more like an eager puppy. That's why he decided to visit in person. Hyungwang comments that Mujin seems to know Hyegwan well, adding that he used to follow him everywhere. He concludes that his disciple feels he owes him his life, or at least that's what he heard. Mujin rushes into position as Hyungwang remarks that he didn't do anything special for him, but the way Hyegwan runs towards his master reminds him of his own childhood. He remembers running just like that toward his own grandparents. The young Hyegwan would rush over, asking if his master had recovered, just like he once ran to show his grandfather a beetle. But in his excitement, he trips on a rock and goes tumbling to the ground. His grandparents watch the scene, knowing that excitement always leads to carelessness. Turning at the movement of the young monks, Master Hyungwang sees what's happening. This is the moment Mujin and Mugyong move in to attack Hyegwan. The two execute a combined attack, using their master's own words on fighting dirty. Caught off guard by his excitement, Hyegwan is taken by surprise. Mujin and Mugyong strike at the same time, moving in together, but their blows are blocked. Mujin realizes just how strong the brigade chief is. Holding the shattered pieces of his gourd, Hyegwan remarks that it wasn't a bad surprise. In fact, he was touched. Then he grabs both Mujin and Mugyong by the head. He then slams their heads into the ground, telling them they need another century of training. Hyegwan orders them to keep training while he's gone. They both agree. Beside Hyungwang, the older master asks if he isn't being too hard on the kids. Clutching the bottle, Hyegwan replies that it would be dangerous not to take them seriously. He explains that if he didn't, they'd get soft. You must always be ready for war. He declares firmly that there can be no more regrets, leaving the master to ponder his words. In a flashback, a young monk runs towards Hyungwang. The young Hyegwan enthusiastically announces that he's finally become a third-generation disciple. He's not a novice anymore. Hyungwang congratulates him, saying he'll become one of Shaolin's greatest if he keeps it up. Determined, the young man runs on. He had trained so hard to achieve this, but he freezes when he comes face to face with a dark, imposing figure. The day the demonic cult attacked Shaolin, one of the invaders called him a little bug. The young Hyegwan braces himself for the impending attack. Then, Hyungwang appears in his most powerful form, striking the enemy with a single punch. The master saved countless lives that day. Hyegwan was the last. As a result, his core shattered and he was left powerless. It was then that he decided he would never let those demons rest. He swore revenge, vowing to make them pay for what they had done with his own hands. And so, he took his first steps toward becoming a Grim Reaper, and he regrets nothing. Back in the present, Master Yongwang watches him in silence. The master asks him how he's doing. Hyegwan replies that he's bearing the burden. Hyungwang then asks him to look after that boy from time to time. He explains that it's too soon for him to teach the boy, as he has already surpassed a level Hyegwan can even comprehend. Hyungwang then asks for a sip of his drink. Hyegwan is stunned to realize his master drinks alcohol. He remembers the time he denied it was liquor, and had to quickly hide the bottle. Hyegwan asks cautiously if his master is all right, watching him drink straight from the gourd. Smiling, Hyungwang declares, "This water is delicious," much to his disciple's surprise. Hyegwan then takes the bottle back, offering to do the honor of pouring his master a drink. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Mujin and Mugyong are training together, and in the pagoda, Hyungwang and Hyegwan share a drink. It was an unusual sight at the Shaolin temple, but one worth seeing. But Hyunmyung, the head of the administrative hall, is worried about the finances needed to feed the disciples. Watching from a distance, he fears they won't be able to accept new monks next year because of this, and he places all the blame on those two brats. Mujin notes that Mugyong has also gotten stronger, crediting his training since he arrived. With constant combat, it would be strange if he hadn't improved, but something catches his attention. He starts to wonder what's wrong with the head of the administrative hall. He quickly understands the situation. If the person in charge of the budget was sighing with such a heavy look, things couldn't be good. As Gangyok, a former gym owner, he knew that feeling all too well. Mujin tells Mugyong he recognizes that look, and that things must be tough right now. Living apart from the outside world, the Shaolin Temple represents the pinnacle of martial arts. But that doesn't mean it's free from basic needs, as it depends on donations from visitors. With money from the sect clans, making ends meet was never difficult. A monk tells another to grab a fallen coin before it rolls away, since the administrative hall is saving every penny. The other disciple wonders if the situation is so bad that they have to worry about every single coin. In a low voice, a monk asks if they're poor because of Mujin, and his colleague confirms that, in a way, yes. It all started when Mugyong was bullied by the sect clan disciples, and Mujin stepped in to save him. The punishment for the aggressors was severe. Mute's group had their Kui centers destroyed, losing their ability to learn martial arts, and the merchant protectors from the SEO trade, who terrorized the local residents. They had their skills stripped away, and their fortune returned to the people. When the SEO trade protectors shut down, some sect clans suspected Shaolin had taken their money. They began to fear the same could happen to them. So, to avoid living in constant worry, they decided to leave first. The sect clans sided with the greedy merchants and showed their discontent with Shaolin for kicking them out. Since Shaolin took no action to stop them, almost half of the clans ended up leaving and cutting off their donations. On top of that, the yoga and Pilates equipment for Yongwang and all the modern training equipment for Mujin further increased the huge budget faced by the administrative hall. Seen as a bottomless money pit, Mujin understood he wasn't everyone's favorite, but he helped improve the training of all the other disciples and made the master healthier. Saying that he and Beopgian could now manage the treatment on their own, Yongwang asks Mujin to return to his normal routine. After his training ends, he starts taking care of the grounds and welcoming visitors. Confirming he's finished cleaning, Mujin is called by his peers to greet the guests. The other disciples comment among themselves that he's now doing the same work as them. Welcoming the visitors, Mujin finds the task similar to greeting members at the gym. Suddenly, he hears a noise and sees an old woman struggling to climb the stairs. Telling his colleague he'll be right back, he steps away. He quickly explains that he needs to help someone. Asking if she's all right and what brought her here, he learns she came to pray. Upon hearing her destination is the Great Hall, he offers to carry her there. Saying she doesn't need it, the old woman refuses, but he insists, showing he has more than enough training. Carrying her on his back, he introduces himself as Mujin, a child disciple. For Gangyok, treating all elderly people with respect was always a basic human duty. It was a natural instinct, stemming from being raised by his grandparents since childhood. Because he grew up with them, he always felt an automatic impulse to care for the elderly. Weighing almost nothing, the old woman feels light on his back. Even with bad knees and a bad back, she managed to climb all those steps. Announcing she has finished praying, the old woman thanks him for carrying her. Watching in silence, Mujin sees her head towards the temple exit, but he calls out to her again and asks if she has a moment. In Dongfeng City, Henan Province, located in the same region as Mujin's Shaolin Temple, the area is also home to a large merchant group. Complaining about the regional factions, a man says he wouldn't have to worry if they weren't making a move. Considering the situation, Jigwang Ryu, head of the merchant group, thinks about reinforcing the number of people in Cheongum due to the size of his group. Tired of so many reports, he slams his hand on the table and says he needs a break. Announcing an arrival, a servant informs him that his mother, Madame Gahi Yeon, has returned. Seeing the palanquin approach, Jigwang Ryu decides to go greet her. Rushing to meet his mother, he asks if she visited the Shaolin Temple again. He then asks her to think of her own health, as she's too frail to insist on traveling so far. Replying calmly, Gahi Yeon tells her son not to worry, as she is fine today. She explains that she just received a treatment at the Shaolin Temple. Describing the experience, she mentions a new massage technique with a remarkable touch. She adds that it was much better than the acupuncture and tonics she had grown tired of. Doubtful, Jigwang Ryu questions if that could have been enough to treat her ailments, but upon closer inspection, he notices his mother's appearance has improved, and even the tremors in her leg have lessened. Impressed with the young monk's skill, he decides he will go to the temple the next day to meet him. In his room, Mujin remains thoughtful, for even after helping the old woman, he felt uneasy. It wasn't because she reminded him of his grandmother, nor because she was surprisingly wealthy. The problem was the inscription on the palanquin, which read, Celestial Flow Merchant Group. Recognizing the name, he remembers it was one of the 5 great merchant groups from the universe of the fall of the sinister faction. And in that story, they weren't on the friendly side, but were part of the enemy faction. Introducing himself, Mujin says he's a 3rd-generation disciple, but asks to be called just Mujin. Thanking him for the visit, Gahi Yeon says he's adorable. Jigwang Ryu asks if he was the one who treated his mother, and the young man replies that it was nothing. Smiling, the old woman says she's happy to see him again, and that she came back to pray and get another massage. Jokingly, she comments that she'd introduce him to her granddaughter if he weren't a monk, but Mujin invites her to bring her next time. Watching the scene, Jigwang Ryu notes that not even her own grandchildren are this affectionate, as his mother says she really will bring her. Happy, the young man is glad to see the old woman smiling. Shifting his gaze, Mujin looks at Jigwang Ryu, recognizing him as the head of the merchant group. Realizing the current situation, he understands that, for now, they are just a merchant group. But he recalls that in the novel, the Celestial Flow group was involved in crimes like drug sales and human trafficking. And even though they weren't official allies of the villain, they clearly had some kind of deal. He concludes they haven't been corrupted yet, and that he can uncover the connection by getting closer. Noticing the stare, Jigwang Ryu asks if there's something on his face. Awkwardly, the young monk quickly denies it. He then comments that the man must spend a lot of time sitting, seeing him massage his own back. Surprised, Jigwang Ryu asks how he knew, confirming that he reads a lot while sitting, and hasn't exercised in some time. Mujin explains that his slightly curved hips and back are typical of someone with a desk job. He suggests that since he's already there, he could get the treatment along with his mother. Jigwang Ryu agrees, curious to see what the boy is capable of. Heading out together, they make their way to Hyungwang's residence. Surprised, the master and Beopgeon notice they have guests at this hour. Arriving at the location, Mujin appears with Ga-hee-yeon and her son, explaining they came for a treatment. Beopgeon asks if it's okay to treat everyone at once, and Hyungwang agrees. Deciding how to split the work, Mujin says he will treat the master and the old woman, while Beopgeon will take care of the gentleman. Showing some tools, Beopgeon explains that the treatment consists of a 4-limb extension technique. Stating the plan, Mujin tells the master that today's treatment will be on the muscle-strengthening machine. Getting into position, Hyungwang places one foot on the rear pedal, grabs the front handle, and pushes back. Commenting on the sensation, he says that even though it's his first time on the machine, he can already feel the effect. Guiding him, Mujin asks him to let him know when his legs get tired so they can move to the next position. Turning next, he invites the old woman to try the spinal correction chair. Helping her sit, he asks her to position herself in the hollow area and lean back. Commenting with slight discomfort, the old woman says that even lying down seems to hurt now. As Hyungwang exercises, Mujin asks how she's feeling, and she replies that she trusts he would never make her do anything dangerous. Revealing the situation, Hyungwang says he's been receiving treatment from Mujin for a while, which leads the woman to question the need for it since he looks so healthy. Calmly explaining, the master says he was in much worse condition before, leading the woman to conclude that Mujin has a golden touch. Between the laughter and light conversation, the place begins to feel more like a rehabilitation center for the elderly than a temple. Curious, Beopgeon asks Jigwang Ryu about the 4-limb extension technique, and the man replies that it was very good. Detailing the experience, he explains that it was quite painful at first, but the pain subsided over time, leaving only a feeling of relaxation. Grateful, the head of the merchant group thanks him for the treatment, while Beopgeon shows relief at having been able to help. Admitting the truth, Beopgeon says it was the first time he'd used Mujin's technique on someone else, surprising Jigwang Ryu. Thoughtfully, the merchant recalls having heard the name Hyungwang somewhere before. Watching the scene, he notices Beopgeon comment that his master still has some muscles that need to be loosened. Turning to Mujin, Beopgeon asks if he wants to try the heat and stimulation treatment. Refusing with a gesture, Hyungwang says he's better, and demonstrates that he can perform the treatment himself. Surprised, Mujin realizes he already has enough inner strength to generate the chi of fire and thunder in each hand. Impressed, Ga-hee-yeon comments that she now understands Hyungwang is a man of great talent. Approaching, Jigwang Ryu asks Beopgeon if that man's name is really Hyungwang. Noticing the signs, he understands these are not techniques any Murim practitioner could perform and starts to remember who he is. 30 years ago, Hyungwang was the man who defeated the demonic cult that invaded the temple, known as the greatest under the heavens. Shocked, Jigwang Ryu can hardly believe the man before him is the legendary divine monk of Shaolin. Recalling the gossip, he remembers rumors that the master had been incapacitated after the demonic cult's attack. Observing his recovery, he concludes that the 4-limb extension technique was able to cure him. Reflecting in silence, Jigwang Ryu begins to think that perhaps this meeting was fated to happen. The treatment he and his mother received was, without a doubt, truly effective, coming from the legendary master who had once lost his powers, and that 4-limb extension technique had been created by the young Mujin. There were no more doubts. That boy was truly special. As night falls, Ga-hee-yeon thanks him again for the day, and Mujin replies that it was his pleasure. Hyungwang applies the treatment to the old woman's arm, who comments on how pleasant the sensation is. Later that night, Mujin says says goodbye to Jigwang Ryu, but the man asks for a moment before leaving. He says he will return early the next morning to talk, and asks to be taken to the administrative hall. Mujin agrees to accompany him, but asks the reason for the visit. Jigwang Ryu replies that he will explain the next day, as the matter also involves him. The young man agrees to inform those in charge, and is left to wonder what he might be planning. The next morning, Mujin leads the head of the merchant group to the Shaolin Administrative Hall. Hyunmyoung, the head of the hall, asks the visitor to repeat what he just said. Then Jigwang Ryu proposes that the Celestial Flow merchant group and the monk Mujin open a clinic together. As payment for his mother's treatment, Jigwang Ryu offers 100 liang of gold, enough to feed the temple for a year. Regretting he can't give more at the moment, he admits the treatment was more promising than those from the most famous doctors. Curious, Hyunmyoung asks him to better explain the idea of opening a clinic with Mujin. Explaining with conviction, he comments that Mujin's treatment techniques are found nowhere else on the continent. Believing in its potential, he states it could help many patients who can't be cured by traditional treatments. Hyunmyoung immediately refuses, saying that Shaolin doesn't profit from the work of its disciples. Finishing his thought, he states the clinic would end up only benefiting the wealthy. Realizing his plan has been discovered, the merchant reacts, saying that isn't his only goal. As a member of one of the 5 great merchant groups, he reminds them he has many connections. Reflecting on this, Jigwang Ryu realized that using Mujin's treatment on the elderly and the rich would be highly profitable. Deciding cautiously, he concludes he first needs to build a close relationship with Shaolin. Proposing a deal, he suggests that half the profits go to Shaolin to help those in need. However, Hyunmyoung argues that building trust takes time and sincerity, and a single misunderstanding can destroy it. Finding all this a bother, the head of the administrative hall shows his impatience. Questioning silently, he wonders why they're refusing, since they need the money. Sensing an opportunity, Mujin realizes he can use his experience as a gym owner in this situation. Asking for permission, he requests to speak. Speaking cautiously, he says he believes he has an idea. Recalling the central point, he comments that the problem would be treating only the rich, which the master confirms. So he suggests treating everyone, without distinction between rich and poor. Confused, the 2 men stare at him and ask what he means by that. Explaining logically, he states that if the same treatment fee is set, the poor won't be able to afford it, which would reduce demand. Therefore, he proposes they create 2 facilities instead of just one. One would be open to everyone, free of charge, while the other would be reserved for the wealthy. As Jigwang Ryu begins to question the idea, he tries to interrupt, but Mujin asks to be allowed to continue. Anticipating the reaction, he states that the rich will complain about being the only ones paying. The free facility would use the basic 4-limb extension technique on a daily schedule. The paid facility, on the other hand, would add extra treatments and techniques, including the heat and thunder ki treatment. This was the business model of large gyms, with a basic price and personal training for an additional fee. Impressed by the idea, Jigwang Ryu wonders how a child could have thought of something like this. Calmly explaining, Mujin says that the rich love luxury and that vanity is involved, making the merchant understand immediately. Concluding the reasoning, Jigwang Ryu states that the free facility would be for groups and the paid one by reservation only, attracting the rich through pride. Furious with the proposal, Hyunmyoung reacts with indignation. He then yells at Mujin, questioning how a Shaolin disciple dares to speak of worldly vanity for profit. Directly, the young man asks what the master is afraid of, making him even angrier. Recalling the recent past, Mujin says that before, he feared Shaolin would seem greedy by taking money from the rich to help the poor. Now that he suggests a way to treat the poor, the master opposes taking advantage of the rich, making Mujin question Shaolin's ability to accept criticism. Growing even angrier, Hyunmyoung asks how he dares to speak about Shaolin that way. Intervening in the discussion, Jigwang Ryu asks if profiting from the rich would truly harm Shaolin's prestige. Admitting his concern, the hall chief says he doesn't want people to criticize the temple, but Mujin states that he would be more bothered by not helping those in need just to avoid criticism. He continues, saying it doesn't matter if people don't understand, because the truth is what counts. The truth is that Shaolin is always working to help the people, and what matters is the meaning behind the law. Staring at him in silence, Hyunmyoung sees the image of Master Hyungwang reflected in him. Standing up slowly, Hyunmyoung agrees that Mujin might be right, but he warns that the decision will require the abbot's permission, and that the matter still needs to be discussed internally. Grateful for the decision, Jigwang Ryu celebrates as he realizes the plan worked. Muttering under his breath, Mujin says he barely got the idea approved and doesn't understand what the head monks are thinking. In any case, he managed to get closer to the Celestial Flow merchant group. Now he can use this business as an excuse to investigate the group more deeply and find out who the villain is. That night, Yeonmyeong talks to Yeonkaeun about everything that happened, and he receives an enthusiastic approval in response. Firmly believing, the abbot says that Mujin is the child capable of guiding Shaolin in the right direction. Suggesting a recognition, Master Hyungwang proposes they reward the young man for all he has done. Curious, Hyunchin asks what kind of reward would be suitable, and the master replies that an elixir would be good. He adds that for it to be a true reward, it could only be that. Shocked by the suggestion, the abbot reacts in silence. In disbelief, he can't accept that the master is being serious. The next day, during the afternoon training, Mujin asks his master what brought him there and what he's holding. Placing something in his hands, Hyungwang says it's a gift for everything he's done, stating that he got it for him. Inside is the Shaolin elixir, the elixir of life, leaving Mujin completely shocked. Elixir pearls are a type of traditional medicine found in historical dramas and martial arts novels. These special ingredients are known for storing large amounts of qi. They are famous for the strong boost in inner power when consumed, with the Shaolin elixir pearl being considered the best and rarest of all. Master Hyungwang then presents the reward inside a small box. He tells Hyejong that this is a prize for his incredible achievement. Hyungwang recalls that he actually wanted the great elixir pearl for his disciple, but the abbot recommended the small one for now. The master scoffs at the insignificant item but states it's still a cause for celebration, while Hyejong decides to ignore the comment. Hyejong asks if they don't consider him ready for the larger pearl, but Hyungwang just says he'll understand when he takes this one. Then, the master encourages him to take it right now, assuring him he'll help with the process. Hyejong eagerly accepts, as it's not every day one receives such a rare offer. They arrive at a pavilion hidden in the middle of the forest, a good spot with plenty of naturally flowing qi. Seated, the master explains that absorbing qi from an elixir will be different and will work in the opposite direction of the usual method. The normal technique involves breathing in qi slowly, but with an elixir, the energy flows straight to the stomach. Hyejong concludes that instead of concentrating on his breath, he needs to focus on the qi of the elixir itself, and his master confirms it. But Hyungwang warns him that if he gets greedy and tries to retain all the energy, he will fall into a state known as the burning fiend. Hyejong affirms that he understands the importance of the task, as he has never seen his master so serious. Then he prepares himself and swallows the pearl in one go. Meditating, he feels the power of the small elixir pearl flowing inside him. He wonders how to absorb that energy, and decides it's time to test his focus technique. Hyejong then activates the Great Buddha's focus technique. The qi slides down his throat, reaches his stomach, and spreads through his body via his blood vessels. He finally understands why the heroes of martial arts novels seek these items so desperately, and he reminds himself that he needs to absorb as much as he can, as his grandfather instructed. 30 minutes later, he starts sweating and struggling with the process. Hyejong realizes this is why he was warned not to be greedy, as much of the pearl's qi is escaping. The amount of qi to absorb is simply too great, and he is unable to contain it. He remembers his master's words and realizes that the qi he can't absorb escapes with his breath, repeating the cycle. Hyejong continues the breathing process, inhaling and exhaling. He then opens his eyes, estimating that he managed to absorb maybe a third of the energy, but he concludes that this is more than enough and that he doesn't need to worry about what was lost. Mujin tells his master that he tried not to be greedy, but it seems he failed. Hyungwang confirms that the small elixir pearl possesses immense power. He then reveals that Mujin actually absorbed all the power of the pearl, but this miracle was only possible because of Hyungwang's direct involvement. As the young man coughs, the master had caught the qi escaping from his disciple and combined it with the natural qi in the surroundings so it wouldn't be lost. And without Mujin realizing it, he returned the energy little by little for him to breathe it in again. It was a nearly impossible feat, but Hyungwang couldn't let his disciple's effort go to waste. Mujin feels his body trembling and asks how such a small pearl could hold so much qi, stating he can barely stand still. Hyungwang replies that it was all part of the plan and asks him to follow. He asks how they will solve this, and his master reassures him, saying there is an ideal practice for his current state. The best way to calm the immense energy flowing through him is with an unshakable mind. So, he takes him to a waterfall to begin the unshakable mind technique. The reason Hyungwang brought him there was to help him control the qi and train his mind to calm down. Normally, those who practice supreme yang qi Ji, like Hidam and his disciples, follow this training. It's a training method to learn how to control the excitable and impetuous nature of practitioners of this type of Qi. One example is Buddhist chanting while handling prayer beads, and another is focusing on recalling happy memories. In other words, the unshakable mind is about keeping the mind and body calm. Hyungguang then tells Mujin that after meditating for hours, it is now time to test his movements, and Mujin unleashes the chain-linking fist. After hours of visualizing the forms under the waterfall, Mujin had calmed his mind and controlled the flow of his energy. The resulting power was enough to split the waterfall in two, and that's how Mujin became even stronger. He then looks at Hyungguang. The boy's growth made the old man happy, and brought him even more enlightenment. In gratitude, the two shared a long look and bowed to each other. They spent 2 days like this, and then the master asks if he is ready. Before the abbot and other monks, it is said that Mujin is not yet of age to enter the world, so the 5 of them must look after him. Elsewhere, Jigwang Ryu reports that most of the preparations are complete, with only a trip to the Dengfeng prefecture needed for verification. The abbot thanks Mujin for everything he has done, and Hyungguang instructs him to go, work hard, and return. Mujin thanks them for the trust placed in him and promises that Shaolin and the Celestial Stream Merchant Group will work together. He then states that they will help as many people as they can to overcome the crisis they are facing. Hyungguang agrees with his disciples' words. Then, the master wishes him a safe journey, and Mujin thanks him as he walks away from the temple. In a dark room, a woman sitting at a table is asked if they can go now. Then, a voice calls her by the name of Lady Seolhwa. Leaving the temple behind, they finally spot the Dongfeng province. Arriving in the city, Mujin comes across a scene straight out of a movie. During his journey, he got into some disputes while stopping at inns. In the process, he ends up saving a maiden and getting rid of some bandits. Celebrating enthusiastically, he says he's finally living the new Shaolin story. A week later, a curious man asks another if he's heard the news. He mentions seeing monks from the Shaolin temple who opened a clinic there. Suspicious, the other man asks if the monks are just there to make money, but his friend replies that's foolish, as the treatment is completely free. Noticing his excitement, the friend says he doesn't even look like he has health problems. He explains that his legs tremble from carrying heavy loads and he wanted acupuncture. His friend then recommends he go, since they're treating backs and legs today. The friend continues, saying that's not the only strange thing. Following Mujin's idea, he managed to get 2 buildings to operate the clinics. He then reveals that he named the clinic and made each building different. Pointing to the building on the left, he says it's for free treatment and rest. Thinking of the monks, they also prepared a separate place for training and study. The building on the right will be the paid clinic, offering treatments to the nobility. He points out that the equipment is the same, just with an improved appearance. Introducing himself, Mujin says he'll be the one in charge of his treatment. They whisper about him being the strange monk, but Mujin shouts that he can hear them. Ignoring the comment, he asks the man to sit down to begin the procedure. The man sits, curious about the unusual treatment. Then he applies strong pressure to the man's leg, who reacts instantly. Feeling the pain, the man squirms, and Mujin tells him that's natural. He asks if it's normal for it to hurt so much, and is told the pain is proportional. Mujin says he'll reduce the pain and then use a leather item. Continuing the treatment, he explains that releasing the knots will bring improvement. When the pain finally subsides, he announces they can start the second part. Asking the man to sit, he instructs him to use the leather item. He continues the exercise, and Mujin praises him, saying he's doing well. Feeling the relief, he comments that the sensation is actually very good. He mentions he was tired of acupuncture and that this is much better. Asking him to roll further inward, he admits he's not familiar with this Shaolin treatment. He then says this is a gift from the monks to the world. Saying it's touching that they came from so far, he decides not to keep it to himself. After such a good treatment, the news begins to spread quickly. The clinic quickly became a success, with many people seeking out the center. Eventually, the news also reached the ears of the wealthiest nobles. Then, one of them shows up seeking treatment at the paid facility. Showing the equipment, he explains the only difference was in appearance. One of the nobles shouts that his body deserves the finest gold fabric. People kept coming in, regardless of the differences. The monks dedicated themselves to helping every patient who arrived. In the midst of the rush, a monk asks for help with a specific treatment. At this, everyone is moved by his tireless dedication to the patients. From that moment on, he came to be known as the young Buddha. Soon, the clinic became an important and bustling part of the local community. Talking with a man, he says it was difficult, but they were accepted. Introducing himself as Jin Pyong, he thanks him deeply on behalf of his group, but Mujin says they are the grateful ones, since Shaolin was in ruins. Pointing at the crowd, he says everyone came seeking their treatment. He then announces it's time to switch shifts with brother Biop Gang. Just then, Biop Gang appears, and Mujin says he was just talking about him. Seeing Beopgang, the man greets him and asks if he's been well. Beopgang then approaches and explains to Mujin that the man owes him a debt. Recalling the past, Beopgang asks if he remembers his meditation. Then he reveals he found a lost girl who was the leader's daughter. At that, Mujin remembers the young girl he found with a monk. He finally realizes that little girl was the noble merchant's daughter. He then mentions that the young lady will be stopping by later today. Then, he looks towards the courtyard and announces that she's arriving now. Turning curiously, he comments that she must have grown up a lot, but upon seeing her, he is left completely speechless and shocked by the scene. He wonders if it's really her, noticing everyone greets her so formally. Turning to the man, he asks if that is the young woman he mentioned. He then confirms, revealing she is the youngest daughter of their great leader. Continuing his explanation, he says she is the merchant leader's daughter. He then reveals her name is Lady Seolwa Ryu, the heir to the group. Completely surprised, he yells, "What?" in disbelief. He remembers the little girl he found years ago in the mountains, but he realizes that little girl isn't so little anymore. Arriving at the courtyard, Lady Seolwa is formally greeted with bows from those present. Watching from a distance, a man asks why the higher-ups are bowing to her. His friend then explains that she is the daughter of the merchant group's director. The man replies that she's not quite what he was imagining. He thought the daughter of a wealthy family would be much more delicate. Agreeing, Mujin says that Lady Seolwa seems to have really grown up as she leaps from a rooftop with impressive agility. Shifting to the clinic, an old man calls him Young Buddha and asks him to rest, but he replies that nothing makes him happier than treating patients. Asking them to call him Mujin, he says the nickname is an exaggeration. The old men praise him, saying he is kind, strong, and very handsome. One even offers to introduce his dear granddaughter to the young man. Arguing with his friend, another old man tells him to meet his granddaughter instead. He reflects on the free clinic's popularity among the elderly. Saying it would be an honor, he agrees to meet both of the old men's granddaughters. Thinking with a smile, he notes that they luckily bought his excuse. He then plans to escape the mountain when he finally becomes stronger. Looking at the courtyard, he confirms that it really is the girl, Seolwa. He notices she seems very different from the character he knew from the book. In the book, Seolwa Ryu was one of the characters from the dreaded Sinister faction. In the story, her faction was largely responsible for human trafficking. According to the book's descriptions, she was a huge and very intimidating woman. Because of her insecurity, she would torture any girl she found beautiful. He then realizes the description doesn't match the real girl at all. To him, it made more sense for Mugyong to end up as a villain due to his personality. But the Seolhwa he sees has nothing in common with the one from the book. She just seems like a shy girl, ashamed of her own appearance. He wonders if something pushed her over the edge or if it was something else.